Chapter 736. Today, I'm going to write some nonsense first, so that everyone can read it first. There have been a lot of things going on at home these past few days, and my mental state has been rather poor, so it's been very difficult for me to write. I've written very little, and I'm afraid that I'll write too badly, so I didn't dare to force myself to write more. Please be patient, and I'll resume 2 chapters on Monday. I don't want to use the previous chapter name, so I'll use a new one. Thank you. Zhang Xiaoming glanced at the information in his hands, and quickly raised her gaze to look into Su Li's eyes. She said softly, "Ever since my teacher passed away, Shi Qinghai has, in a sense, automatically left the organization. Including the incident in Linhai, that's already twice. After the incident on Parliament Hill, the committee's statement also confirmed this, but he's still a member of Green Dragon Mountain." "What are you trying to say?" Su Lu asked. Zhang Xiaoming smiled and said, "What I want to say is that Shi Qinghai has always acknowledged this identity, and that's why he gave me this very important information. According to the organization's rules, I should have sent this information back to the mountain and kept it a secret, but I think you probably need this as well." Su Lu raised his head. The dim light of the alley shone on his face, and his smile seemed unusually sincere and relaxed. He quietly looked into the girl's eyes behind the lens, and with a hint of emotion, he said, "You're no longer that naive and headache-inducing girl who puts the organization and mission above everything else. This is really good." Zhang Xiaoming lowered her head slightly, and the strands of hair that flew up from her mane trembled in the slightly damp spring night breeze, just like the scars left in the memories of this pair of first love and their youth that they missed. "But Mr. Shi has never put the organization above everything else, so he also gave me a copy of this important information." Su Lu looked at the side of her face and said softly, "I just don't understand. Since he already found out what he wanted to find, why did he still charge into Parliament Hill and shock everyone?" After a moment of silence, Zhang Xiaoming recounted the situation in detail, including the spy who betrayed Shi Qinghai. She didn't even hide the dark deal between the committee and the government of the Federation. She knew Su Li's character very well and knew that he needed to know all the details before his friend left. "The committee's decision has chilled me and many comrades in the department. The spring night was not yet deep, but the rain from a few days ago and the humidity of the surrounding environment made the air a little chilly." Zhang Xiaoming hugged her shoulders gently and realized that her shoulders were much thinner than when she was in school. Su Lu walked beside her in silence. He took off his military jacket clumsily and handed it over awkwardly. Zhang Xiaoming put on the military jacket and felt the warmth from the cloth. She took a deep breath in satisfaction and said with a smile, "Thank you." Under the dim street lamp that hung high in the sky like the third moon, the two slowly stopped. Zhang Xiaoming turned around and looked at Su Lu quietly. Her calm eyes naturally revealed a look of worry. "He was poisoned, so he didn't have a choice. But you are different. I'm not talking about the bright future the government of the Federation promised you, nor the high regard the military has for you. I just hope that you will seriously think about whether there is a better choice before you make a decision. Don't be too impulsive." "Okay." Su Lu nodded and replied in a low voice, "Before Mr. Shi died, I promised him that I wouldn't go crazy. Although he probably didn't hear it, I will definitely do what I promised him. The old military god also gave me very serious instructions before he died." His eyes narrowed, and his expression was solemn and serious. "I will do everything in my power and seize every opportunity to win this battle and protect myself. I will make all the enemies stand on this land very unhappy and watch the outcome of this matter." Zhang Xiaoming smiled quietly. She knew that he would do what he said. Her worried heart finally relaxed. She said, "Be careful when you go out later. The Federation government is very clear about my true identity. Section 4 of the Federation's Investigation Bureau has been watching me. You are a hero of the Federation who has been destroyed by public opinion once. If you are photographed with me, it will provide your enemies with a lot of good material. Don't worry. No one in the Federation can follow me now. Su Lu was telling the truth, but the feeling he gave was so confident that it bordered on arrogance. It was probably because the truth itself was too unbelievable. Mr. Shi used to belong to Section 4 of the Federation's Investigation Bureau. He frowned and sighed. The government and your Green Dragon Mountain are both called Section 4. This kind of coincidence is really interesting. That guy has been in both sections. He looked at Zhang Xiaoming and suddenly smiled. Do you know how I met Shi Qinghai? At the time, he was still working in the Federation's Investigation Bureau. He was ordered to go to Yue University to investigate you. In the end, he was slacking off under the sun. I just happened to be sunbathing behind the iron gate at the time. The voice suddenly became low in the night alley. The light seemed to burn. It was as if time had returned to that sunny day in Linhai a few years ago. There were many ordinary stories that happened beside the iron gate of Yue University, but now it seemed like the characters in these stories were more willing to have that kind of ordinary life. For Su Lu, Shi Qinghai and Zhang Xiaoming were the first friends he had truly met when he fled thousands of miles to the capital ring. The puppy biscuit and the cigarette that was handed to him through the iron gate under the sun. The beautiful plainclothes agent who smiled under the sun. The gatekeeper who hid his identity and escaped. The young university student who had just escaped from her identity as a revolutionary young woman. So many years had passed in the blink of an eye. At the time, Shi Qinghai was still very young but was already decadent. Su Lu was young but silent and dull. Zhang Xiaoming always had so many thoughts and always thought that she could shoulder a lot of responsibilities. Until his death, Shi Qinghai insisted that Zhang Xiaoming was a stupid and boring woman. Su Lu still insisted to this day that even without that cigarette, he would have become good friends with the hoodlum. Actually, he was already tired of being a spy. It was only because of the death of his teacher, the fat director of HDD Bureau, that he became spirited again. He once told me that since there was no turning back, then I had to bravely move forward. Su Lu raised his head and looked at the dim street lights above him. However, he noticed that there were raindrops falling down. He could not help but squint his eyes. I don't understand politics. Even after so many years, I still can't completely understand the way you people from Green Dragon Mountain think. However, I know very well that Shi Qinghai was indeed an idealist. Su Lu was silent for a moment. He took out a crumpled letter from his shirt pocket and handed it to Zhang Xiaoming. This is a letter he wrote to me before he went into hiding. If I were to praise him with any words I could think of, it would probably be the words on this letter that would shine. I think this letter is very suitable for the youths of Green Dragon Mountain to read, so I'm giving it to you for safekeeping. Zhang Xiaoming took the letter with a serious expression and carefully put it away. She said softly, I'll transfer it to the mountain. Then, what do you plan to do? Su Lu narrowed his eyes and looked at the night rain that was as clear as silk under the street lights. He said in a deep voice, I'm going to the police autopsy room to pick him up. Chapter 737. Su Lu didn't make any guarantees about the worry in Zhang Xiaoming's eyes. He calmly turned to another serious and important topic. The power on the other side seems to be stronger than I thought. There are some problems with my communication with the official residents. But according to my judgment, Mr. President's silence over the past few days has actually given me enough information. So, without meeting him, I think I should be able to do something specific. Mr. Pabre's moral character is impeccable, but you're so sure that he's deliberately keeping silent to send you information and that he's not completely under someone's control? No one, not even a fully armed soldier, can completely control the President of the Federation. Besides, Mr. Pabre is Mr. Shi and my President. He used to be a soldier, and he's not a political naive. How could his performance be so bad? In my opinion, what Mr. President needs now is a strong enough voice from the periphery of the government to help him poke through the window paper that he can't poke his finger through, or give him an excuse to poke through the window paper. It seems that you've been reading a lot of Schiller's novels these past few years. You're very familiar with the classical phrase, window paper. Zhang Xiaoming looked at him with a smile and said, "Since you're so confident, I won't say anything more. I wish you good luck." "Thank you." Su Lu sincerely hugged her, and then prepared to leave. Under the dim street lights in the rainy alley, Zhang Xiaoming looked at his face and suddenly said, "When you go to pick up Shi Qinghai, help me pass on a message to him. I think he is the best spy, and even more so, the best soldier." "I'll definitely pass on the message." Su Lu wiped the raindrops off his face and replied with a smile, "Although he's never liked you, he should like your comment very much." Walking out of the rainy alley, they shook hands and climbed over the railing. Following the 3 big locust trees to the west, they walked past the little girl selling umbrellas. The two gently hugged and said goodbye, and then went to different subway entrances. A few minutes later, Su Lu, with his hair slightly wet, walked out of the subway entrance of the Capital Special District 4. He silently walked to the dark green military vehicle that had been waiting for him for a long time. He sat in the spacious back compartment, deep in thought. After the Parliament Hill incident, the enraged Federation government and Parliament immediately set up a high-level investigation committee. 3 temporary teams were formed to handle this special case. Because Shi Qinghai used to be a high-ranking official in the Federation Investigation Bureau, and it was later found that he had used the Federation Investigation Bureau's resources and network countless times in the past 4 years, the Special Task Force excluded the Investigation Bureau from the Federation Investigation Bureau. The police headquarters, the Ministry of Justice, and the Ministry of National Defense worked together to handle the case. The task force was scattered among many buildings in the capital, including the police station on Esparta Avenue. This building was not responsible for the most important investigation tasks, but it was responsible for looking after and handling a lot of evidence related to the case. So, even though it was already late at night, there were still many police officers and officers working overtime or tiredly keeping watch. There were 2 high-back chairs outside the cold storage. A fat police officer was sprawled out like a thick pancake and slumped on the chair. He was grumbling to his partner about things that he couldn't let his superior hear. "I was planning to have a good drink in the pub tonight, but who knew I would have to work overtime at the last minute? Sometimes, when I think about the mixture of alcohol and water that left me, I feel so angry that I can't wait to drag the dead man in the room up and beat him up." His partner was an old police officer with grizzled hair. He said mockingly, "The guy in the room is not someone you and I can beat up. Don't be angry. That guy killed the vice president of the Federation. Of course, it's very important. We have to keep a close eye on him." "What's there to look at?" the fat police officer said mockingly. "In the beginning, the superiors always thought that such a crazy thing on Parliament Hill couldn't have been done by one person. They thought that he had an accomplice, so they were worried that something might go wrong. But in fact, they didn't find a single accomplice. This madman really did break into Parliament Hill alone." The old police officer smiled, a trace of emotion showing in the wrinkles at the corner of his eyes. "Not to mention accomplices, after so many days, we haven't found any relatives coming to collect his body." The fat police officer waved his fat finger and pointed at the plastic steel door behind his head. He said in a low voice, "I heard that the guy's parents died a long time ago. As for his other relatives, please, he is now a criminal who murdered the vice president of the Federation and the members of the Parliament. What is he if not a traitor? Even if he is dead, he won't be clean. The people in the Federation are cursing him non-stop. Even if he does have relatives or friends, who would dare to come and visit him at this time?" Just as he finished speaking, the low and powerful roar of an engine came from a Sparta street outside the police station. There was the clear sound of brakes, followed by a series of hurried but definitely not disorderly footsteps. It was the sound of many pairs of military boots stepping on the old wooden stairs of the police station at the same time. It was a shocking sound that could only be made by many pairs of hard-soled military boots stepping on the old wooden stairs of the police station. The fat police officer and the old police officer looked at each other in confusion. Then, they slowly stood up, their right hands touching the gun holsters at their waists at the same time. At the end of the corridor, a group of soldiers escorted a young officer and silently walked over. The young officer looked somewhat familiar. The atmosphere of the group was particularly solemn because their expressions were very serious. In front of the storage room, the burly man in the group raised his steel-like arm and pointed behind the two stunned police officers. He said to the young officer in a low voice, "The young master is in there." When Su Lu was about to walk into the cold storage room to take one last look at the person, the two grumbling but still loyal police officers finally reacted. The fat police officer looked at the group of soldiers in front of him with unease and vigilance. His finger quietly picked at the hidden buckle of his gun holster and said in a low voice, "Sorry, I can't let you in." Gu Shifeng stood behind Su Lu and said with a smile, "According to the relevant laws and regulations of the Federation, if the case has been reported with complete evidence, then the deceased suspect can be handed over to the claimant. The young master lying in the freezer behind you doesn't have any family or friends, so we're here today to claim his civil rights." The two police officers looked at each other. Thinking about what they had just said, they didn't quite react. A moment later, the fat police officer shook his head and said, "I don't understand what you're talking about. I ask you to leave immediately. No one will agree to your ridiculous request." Su Lu lowered his head slightly, then raised his right foot and walked forward. The two police officers wanted to pull out their guns, but they were horrified to find that at some point, two thick cold gun barrels were silently pressed against the back of their neck. Su Lu didn't notice the police officers' instantly pale faces. He directly pushed open the door to the cold storage room and found the exact position in the freezer on the three walls. Without any hesitation or sad pause, he opened the freezer and opened the bag. After confirming that there was no mistake, he immediately waved his hand and signaled for his team members to help carry the guy out. He looked at the pale and quiet face in the bag, narrowed his eyes, pursed his lips, and said in a low voice, "Let's change places. It's too cold here. I'm going to freeze to death." Chapter 738. The Sparta police station building was very lively. The lobby that was quiet and empty a moment ago suddenly became noisy and dangerous. The military police from different departments huddled together with complicated expressions on their faces. They were also vaguely divided into two groups. They stared at each other seriously, but the guns in their hands were carefully aimed at the ground, afraid that there would be a possibility of accidental fire. Su Lu and his team members did not make it out of the building. They were stopped by the military police of the task force at the exit. Because they had not been given any orders, other than Xiong Linquan and a few other team members with special gun permits, they did not have many guns. The Federation police looked at the tiger-like soldiers under the chandelier and very vigilantly and cleverly retreated to the back of the crowd, leaving the task of negotiating to the military representatives of the task force. A lieutenant colonel from the capital garrison nervously held his pistol and looked at the people in front of him with a serious and uneasy expression. He opened his mouth and said, "Colonel Su Lu, what you are doing will make things very difficult for us." Suddenly, a group of soldiers broke into the police station building, took away the police officers' weapons, broke into the freezer, and even tore down a freezer. The task force was all alarmed. When they discovered the identity of these soldiers, they immediately felt that the situation was very urgent and very troublesome. They immediately notified the soldiers' direct superior, the new 17th Division. The new 17th Division had just returned from the front lines. The soldiers of the various divisions were on vacation, but the division headquarters in the southern suburbs of the capital was still working. However, what the military representatives of the task force did not expect was that when they called, the atmosphere in the 17th Division headquarters seemed to be a bit strange. Especially when they heard the whole story, they immediately said that the 17th Division headquarters did not know about it. It should be Colonel Su Li's personal action, and they had no way of controlling it. Colonel Su Lu. The lieutenant colonel of the garrison swallowed hard and said, Director Chin of the Ministry of National Defense is on his way. I suggest that you wait for a while. This matter was too big. If the members of Team 7, who were once idols of the Federation, were allowed to leave the building, the task force would not be able to answer to their superiors. It could even be said that they would not be able to answer to the entire Federation. After all, the person they wanted to take away had once barged into Parliament Hill and killed the Vice President of the Federation. He was the mastermind behind the most horrifying incident in the 37 years of history. However, the officers of the task force did not dare to appear too tough. The other party was the legendary Team 7. Although this organization had long been disbanded, and the Federation had not promoted them for a long time, that person had returned. The disbanded team would naturally reunite again, and no one could underestimate them. As for Colonel Su Lu, the entire army knew about his relationship with Minister Zhou, and knew that the war god had high hopes for him. Who would dare to raise their guns and aim at his head? Su Lu stood among the team members in front of the black freezer. Looking at the loyal lieutenant colonel, he shook his head and led the team members towards the door. The lieutenant colonel gripped his pistol tightly and said loudly, Colonel Su Lu, do not forget that we are a disciplined army. At this time, a middle-aged man wearing a black suit rushed in from the door, wiping the sweat off his forehead. Su Lu looked at him and said sincerely, Lawyer He, I will have to trouble you with the matter here. This matter is really troublesome. Lawyer He looked at the freezer behind him and could not help but sigh. He said, I don't even know what to say. He turned around and looked at the military police and legal personnel in the task force. He said, May I ask why you are blocking the path of my client? If my memory is not wrong, just before the freezer, my client should have already declared his rights to the police officers in charge of guarding the freezer. You have no reason to stop my client from exercising the rights of his friend after death. The legal issues were left to the professionals. Su Lu led the members of Team 7 to carry the heavy black freezer and prepared to leave. The officers of the task force had extremely ugly expressions. The lieutenant colonel said in a deep voice, Lieutenant Colonel Su Lu, and Mr. Lawyer, what you are planning to forcibly take away is the body of the suspect in the Parliament Hill case. The investigation of the case requires the relevant autopsy on the body. He and a dozen officers blocked the path of the members of Team 7 and said firmly, So you can't leave. Su Lu, who had been silent all this time, slowly narrowed his eyes when he heard this. He looked at the officers in front of him and suddenly said, I want to solve this matter as gently as possible. The so-called rights claim is just that I hope that the task force, which is you, can find a way to stay out of this matter. But in reality, I don't need a way to stay out of this. Autopsy? Do you think I will watch those forensic doctors use a knife to cut open my brother's cold stomach for fun? Su Li's face was expressionless. He stared at the soldiers in front of him and said seriously, Is that even possible? Naturally, the impossible would not happen. In the end, the special task force officers in the police station retreated under the pressure of Su Lu and Team 7. They reported this news to their superiors as quickly as possible. They looked at the military vehicles outside the building, leaving with a complicated expression, but they did not dare to stop them in any way. Su Lu, who was supposed to be presiding over the negotiations in the Silan region, had suddenly returned to the capital. It was likely that the various departments of the federal government would not be able to sleep peacefully on this rainy spring night. No one knew what he would do, and whether he would go crazy. The dark green military vehicle rolled over the wet high-strength concrete street and quickly drove out of Esparta Avenue. The spacious back of the vehicle was not equipped with an auto-aiming light howitzer, so there was still plenty of space after the black freezer was put down. Everyone sat on the chairs on both sides of the military vehicles with their heads lowered as they smoked cigarette. Silence filled the air amidst the pungent smoke. Because of Su Lu, the members of Group 7 had gotten used to smoking from the blue box. However, Su Li's choice of cigarettes was a habit that had been influenced by the guy in the freezer. No one said anything. It was not because of the young man lying in the freezer in front of them. Team 7 had seen all kinds of life and death situations. It was probably because the members had some thoughts in their minds, but no one dared to ask their boss at this time. Su Lu raised his wrist to look at the time and asked, "How long does it take to get from the Army General Hospital to Mansion 11? Lu Jiao, who was in the driver's seat, replied, "Normally, the standard time is 11 minutes. I just don't know if that female nurse is in the General Hospital. I checked. She's working the night shift today. The party at Mansion 11 starts at 10:30. Su Lu lowered his head to look at the schedule on the screen of his phone. He raised his head to ask Da Vinci, who was in the passenger seat, "Are there any branded clothing stores open at night?" Da Vinci turned his head and asked in confusion, "Boss, you want to buy clothes? Is it urgent?" Without waiting for Su Lu to answer, the son of the governor said calmly, "If it's urgent, you can just go to 5th Avenue and smash those clothing stores open." Su Lu smiled. Xiong Linquan, who had been silent all this time, suddenly frowned and said, "Boss, I keep feeling that you've been a little strange since you came back this time." Su Lu spat out a mouthful of bitter saliva and threw the cigarette butt out the window. He looked back at the team members in the car, who had strange expressions on their faces. He shrugged and asked, "What's wrong? Do you think I'm too calm?" Xiong Linquan glanced at the black freezer in front of him, scratched his head and said, "Not only calm but gentle. Did you really think that I would throw myself on top of this coffin and cry my heart out? Then, I would bring you guys to rob the armory in the division first, then rush into the capital special district with 8 or 10 mechas and destroy Parliament Hill once more. Then, I would go to the military base to find trouble with those big shots, pick up Darren's autocannons, and blast anyone who dares to stand in my way into pieces?" Su Lu lit a second cigarette, then shrugged and said mockingly, "I admit that my personality is somewhat flawed, but I'm not a natural-born killer in your eyes." His words were transmitted through the infantry command system to several military vehicles at the same time. The dark green military vehicles that roared through the streets of the capital special district fell into an inexplicable silence. When Shi Qinghai broke into Parliament Hill, he didn't even kill a decorated Iron 7th Division officer. Even at that time, he was still very careful, or should I say very careful. No one knows that this guy is really a very careful person. Su Lu narrowed his eyes, and between the slits of his eyes, he stared at the black freezer in front of him and said, "The front lines are at war. Hundreds of thousands of Federation soldiers are spilling blood and fighting on the planets of the Empire, so the Federation can't fall into chaos. At least, the troops can't fall into chaos. Otherwise, countless people will die because of the chaos in the rear. Shi Qinghai understands this very well, so this time, although there are some things that I have to do, I must understand what he understands and do my best to control the scope of my actions." "Understood." The team members in the car and through the comms system answered at the same time. When he left, he must have felt that he was very arrogant and legendary. This kind of death is very cool, so he must have been very satisfied and proud, without any regrets. That's why my mood right now is very calm. Su Lu gently held the cigarette in one hand and swiped the electronic news on the hologram with the other. When he saw the election news on the second page of the Oak State Tribune, he couldn't help but smile. Not only is it calm, it seems that your mood is somewhat good. Gu Shifeng looked at his smile and spread out her hands. Su Lu didn't answer Gu Shifeng's question. Instead, he asked the young man in the front passenger seat, Da Vinci, did your old man succeed in his re-election? Da Vinci nodded with a gloomy expression and said emotionally, poor Shisha State. Other than being crushed by that famous 300-meter drop roller coaster, they were forced to endure that fat governor for another 5 years. How pitiful! Exaggerated cheers, whistles, and applause sounded from several dark green military vehicles at the same time. Su Lu laughed and scolded a few times. He lowered his head and looked at the picture of the familiar delicate and thin face of Tai Ziyuan on the second page of the Oak State Tribune, as well as the news about the birth of the youngest state senator. He muttered to himself, but also seemed to be answering Gu Shifeng's question. My friends are all on the right path. Of course I'm in a good mood. He raised his head and patted the black freezer in front of him. He said with a smile, including you. At the front desk of the inpatient department of the Army General Hospital, a rather capable female nurse stared at her companion in front of her, whose eyes were slightly red. She said in a low voice, Huang Li, what happened to you recently? Did something happen at home? I often secretly look at you crying. It's nothing. Huang Li forced a smile, but she didn't know how to explain. The capable and powerful girl in front of her was her rare good friend in the hospital. She was young and had a fierce personality, but she had always been very concerned about her. It was just that, the strange story and the man with purple lips who was as beautiful as a flower would be a dream that she would hide in the bottom of her heart for the rest of her life. She would never be able to tell anyone. At this time, a few big men with cold expressions and an uncomfortable smell came to the front desk. They rudely asked, Where is Huang Li? Let her come out. The young female nurse, who had delicate features but was particularly awe-inspiring and powerful, was slightly startled. She looked at the extremely impatient and fierce guys outside the front desk and blocked Huang Li, who had a perplexed and frightened expression, behind them. She thought that she roughly understood why the little girl had been secretly crying in a place where no one was around these days. I don't care if you are a finance company or some random people. She gritted her teeth and said angrily, This is a hospital. I ask you to get out. Don't make a noise or I will call the security. The female nurse ignored Huang Li, who was anxiously pulling her from behind. She clenched her teeth and mustered up her courage. She stared at the tall and burly man in front of her and said loudly, Also, put out the cigarette immediately. F***ck. Xiong Linchuan's eyes widened. He stared at the weak female nurse in front of him, who looked like he could pinch her to death with 2 fingers. He didn't know where she got the courage to speak to people like him. He waved the cigarette in his hand and said in a muffled voice, Hey, little girl, I can put out the cigarette, but can you speak more politely? Put out the cigarette immediately. The female nurse, who had a strong sense of justice, grabbed the phone and stared at him without showing any weakness. She was ready to call the security at any time. I've just been sulked in the police station building, and now I'm being chased away in your lousy hospital? Xiong Linquan couldn't be bothered with her and shouted, Who's called Huang Li? Call her out right now. You really are a bunch of hooligans. We can't be polite to hooligans like you. The young nurse stood in front of the scared Huang Li. She angrily pointed at Xiong Linchuan's nose and was about to call the security. Xiong Linquan slammed the phone down, glared at him, and growled in a low voice, Take your finger back immediately. Don't make me lose my temper. Otherwise, I can't guarantee that your finger will still work in the next moment. Su Lu stood behind the aisle door. He didn't plan to go find the nurse himself. He really didn't expect that when the men of Group 7 were not by his side, they would create a strong pressure on the general public. When he hesitantly recalled the face of the female nurse and her strong presence, He couldn't help but walk out with a bitter smile. I can guarantee that her finger will always be fine. He walked to the front of the stage and said with emotion, "A few years ago, she pointed at me like this and asked me to put out the cigarette. As for calling us hooligans, that's fine. After all, she is my sister-in-law." The members of Group 7 who walked into the aisle were stunned. They were very confused when they heard the word sister-in-law. They thought to themselves, "Our real sister-in-law is the daughter of the Ministry of National Defense, our rumored sister-in-law is a big star in the universe, and our ex-sister-in-law was an anti-government soldier. But I've never heard of you having a past in the hospital." Sulu explained to the crowd seriously, "This is Lao Bai's wife." As soon as he said that, the entire aisle was silent. Xiong Linquan and all the team members looked at the pretty nurse, who had a strong sense of justice in her eyes, and revealed a flattering smile. Chapter 739. There were too many stories about the relationship between the young man surnamed Bai and Team 7. Before Sulu walked into the inconspicuous office in Whitewater Base for the first time, the core of this combat team that worked for the Federation government was actually this person. Therefore, when Sulu told the team members that this young nurse with delicate features was Lao Bai's wife, after a moment of shock, they immediately accepted the image of their beautiful sister-in-law. They all smiled foolishly and stepped forward to bow and greet her. "Hello, sister-in-law. I'm sorry to offend you. My name is Xiong Linquan. I'm 31 years old this year and I'm not married yet. Do you know any good girls in the hospital? Sister-in-law, Olay didn't let us go to your house. During the wedding, we were still fighting at the front line, so we didn't give you any monetary gift. I'm sorry." The sister-in-law that the team members respectfully addressed was called Lu Jiajia. She was a senior nurse in the Army General Hospital. Looking at these men, who had previously exuded a beastly aura, suddenly turning into docile and well-behaved little animals, one after another walking up to her and greeting her. Then, they took out a thick stack of banknotes from their trouser pockets and placed them in front of her. Her pair of beautiful eyes couldn't help but widen, and her pupils gradually tended to be unable to focus. What kind of people were these old men? Are they my Mr. Bai's comrades? But my family's old Bai is usually a little slow and introverted. He likes to do housework and is too delicate like a girl. Occasionally, he likes to brag that he worked in the legendary Group 7. That night, he once pointed at the Nebula Awards on TV and said that he should have been standing there. Wait, if what my Mr. Bai said is true, then these men are the members of Team 7? Forget it, let's not think too much. How much is this thick stack of cash? Counting carefully, 170,000. The female nurse, Lu Jiajia, was shocked by the number of monetary gift. She was overjoyed, but when she looked up, she found that everyone was gone, including Wu Li, who was behind her. "You don't say, that small-eyed man does look familiar." She frowned and thought very seriously. Every man's forehead was engraved with the words, "Keep your promises." Mr. Sure promised Shimin Jin that he would show justice to the world before he died. Hence, he turned around and blasted Shimin Jin into a punctuation mark outside the Parliament Hill building, swaying in the spring breeze in front of hundreds of millions of people. Mr. Sure had once promised the freckled nurse that he would avenge him, but Mr. Thin Ambition died before he could do anything. Therefore, before he died, he made an interstellar phone call and solemnly told the nurse about this matter. Sulu was also a man, so even if he didn't understand, he still decided to help his Gongzi complete this matter. Before countless big things happened, he didn't forget to bring his team members proudly to the hospital and bring that cute little nurse with freckles out. However, he did not expect to run into the fierce nurse from back then, who was now Lao Bai's wife. Lao Bai committed murder, arson, kidnapping, and extortion in the past. He committed all sorts of crimes. Who would have thought that he would actually fall into the hands of a woman filled with a sense of justice? Later, They were going to bring the nurse to mansion number 11 to play arrogant and bully people. The team members had already taken off their military uniforms and changed vehicles in advance. Gu Shifeng used her chubby fingers to hold a cigarette. Thinking about what she had seen and heard in the hospital, she couldn't help but glance at Su Lu beside her. She said, "Plus, he fell into the hands of a man filled with a sense of justice. I can't help but sigh. After 67 years of the constitutional calendar, his life has been too hard." "You're bullshitting," Su Lu said angrily. "I'm taking him down the right path. Being a hero is better than being an assassin all those years ago." Gu Shifeng hurriedly explained, "That's true. I just think that Lao Bai's choice of marriage partner is worthy of sympathy. It would be fine if she had a sense of justice, but look at how she was counting the money in the end. She didn't even hear us say goodbye to her and leave. How can this sense of justice be so closely associated with greed?" Huang Ligu sat uneasily in the corner of the car. She didn't know why, but she believed the words of these people. It was probably because, except for that beautiful man with purple lips, no one in this world should know about his past relationship with her. Being in the same room with so many strange men made her nervous. She had originally planned to remain silent, but when she heard these men belittle her friend, she couldn't help but say, "Jia is a very good person." Xiong Linquan and the other team members ignored her and continued to sigh. With such a wife, Lao Bai can't even smoke at home, can he? Su Lu smiled and said, "Lao Bai quit smoking because of this." As he spoke, he glanced at the female nurse in the corner of his eyes. He frowned slightly. He really couldn't understand why Shi Qinghai was so attached to this girl before his death. He even asked him to do such a boring thing. Although she was pretty, how could she compare to him? "May I ask how you and Shi Qinghai met?" he asked the girl with narrowed eyes. Huang Li's cute freckles suddenly lit up before gradually dimming. She tilted her head slightly and looked at the night sky outside the window. She shrugged and said with a hint of sadness in her self-deprecating tone, "So, that's his name." The fleet of dark green military vehicles didn't go directly to number 11 mansion. Instead, according to De Wency's suggestion, they first arrived at 5th Avenue, which was full of luxury brands. On the short journey, Su Lu listened to Huang Li tell the story of the spy and the female nurse in the Army General Hospital. The story wasn't very long, but it moved him and made him fall into silence. The black freezer was silently placed in the dark green military vehicle at the front. Su Lu didn't tell her because he didn't think it was necessary. Moreover, the dark night was filled with warm sunlight, so there was no need to be sad. "Please allow me to express my sincere gratitude to you as his friend." He looked at Huang Li with a smile and said sincerely, "That guy liked beautiful girls like you the most. You accompanied him for so many days before he died, so he must be very happy." Huang Li clenched her fists uneasily and replied softly, "The hero of the Federation is thanking me. I'm really not used to it." Su Lu realized that she had recognized him. He said with a smile, "What bullsh *t hero? If Mr. Shi heard this, he would definitely laugh at us." "Why do you call him Mr. Shi? If there is a chance in the future, please tell me the story about him." Huang Li opened her eyes wide and made her request very seriously. After a while, she smiled sweetly and said with satisfaction, "To be honest, I've always been afraid that he was really the terrible bad guy that the news said. Now that I know that he is your friend, I think that even if he is bad, he can't be that bad." While they were having this conversation, they were choosing dresses in the famous VG store on 5th Avenue. The store was closed, but for some reason, it was open again. Obviously, this had nothing to do with Da Vinci's suggestion of breaking in. Su Lu clearly saw the uneasiness and fear in the young nurse's eyes. He knew that she was shocked by the luxury of the store and the number on the label and didn't dare to try it. He said softly, "Choose whatever you want. All the activities tonight will be sponsored by the Sanlin United Bank." "But why do we have to wear such expensive clothes?" Huang Li asked uneasily. Because I promised Shi Qinghai that I would help you crush the self-esteem of that inhumane ex-boyfriend of yours into countless pieces so that you can vent your anger. Su Lu said very seriously, as long as you are willing, I can guarantee that after tonight, your ex-boyfriend will regret his decision very much. Huang Li gripped the shiny little dress tightly. Looking at Su Lu in front of her, she thought of the man who had fallen asleep in the square. Suddenly, she felt a lump in her throat. It was probably because the smell of that man's friends was too strong. Schiller had once written 5 fairy tales, but he had never admitted that they were written by him. The reason why later generations of researchers believed that these 5 fairy tales were written by him was because he shamelessly named all the princes in the fairy tales Schiller, not only because of his style of writing, but also because he shamelessly named all the princes in the fairy tales Schiller. In one of the fairy tales about the life of a female worker in a plant refining plant, Prince Schiller danced with the female worker and fell in love with her. The cliché twists and turns were consummated. Other than the custom of finding shoes for newlyweds in the Federation, it also preserved countless dreams for the girls in the Federation. To Huang Li, that pale and gorgeous man was a prince who had barged into her life without invitation. Although he had already left, he still didn't forget to prepare a grand ball for her and fulfill the wishes of the gray female worker. She was wearing a full set of the latest luxury brand VG and carrying a lady's handbag. She followed behind Su Lu and walked into the entrance of number 11 mansion, which ordinary people would not know. She couldn't help but feel like this was a dream, but because it was a dream arranged by that man, she tried very hard to finish this dream. Which one is your ex-boyfriend? With Gu Shifeng's reminder, Su Lu looked at the innermost square table in the luxurious hall. He looked at the 2 men and 1 woman there and asked softly, "The one on the left?" Huang Li suppressed the rising and falling emotions in her heart. She lowered her eyes and explained, "The one on the opposite side is his current fiancé. I don't know the other man. He should be her brother. Their eyes and eyebrows are very similar." Gu Shifeng frowned and said, "Boss, it's very difficult to fake an invitation from mansion number 11. This means that this place isn't low class. If you want to slap faces other than the VG, I suggest you add something else. For example, after Miss Huang Li was dumped by her boyfriend, she suddenly found a very outstanding boyfriend with a very good family background. She arrogantly brought him to show off in front of her ex-boyfriend. This scene is very tacky and common, but I like it. As the son of the governor, Da Vinci often went to such places. He naturally stood sideways and looked at the other side and said mockingly, "Let this young master go and slap their faces." The team members who entered the mansion to watch the show were very excited. They even wanted to compete with Da Vinci for the role, but in the end, because of their family background, they were all defeated one by one. I also like this kind of scene. Since it's a slap in the face, I want to slap them to death. Su Lu explained to everyone very seriously, "That's why I'm waiting for Li Xiaodong to come." The team members instantly fell silent. Da Vinci was shocked speechless. He looked sympathetically at the male doctor who didn't know what was going on. He thought to himself, "Boss actually sent the young masters of 7 families for this kind of thing. You'll be slapped to death later, but you can rest in peace. I'm happy because from the beginning until the end of the story, the characters will be happy and happy, or at least calm and peaceful. At least that's what I feel. As for Mr. Shi's death, I haven't explained it yet. Today I'll explain it. I don't like to repeat myself, so when I was writing it, I deliberately separated it from that old dog. Since we have different views on life, our performances will naturally be different. Mr. Shi's death was very peaceful, very proud and very proud. When I was writing it, I felt very comfortable. I don't know how to describe it. I didn't write his death for any follow-up plot. I usually don't do this kind of thing when I'm writing a plot structure. I just felt that it was time for him to die. Later, after some self-analysis, it was probably because I always thought that such a seductive man was really boring to live. Since ancient times, beauties were like famous generals who didn't want to see their hair turn white. Mr. Sure was a beauty and a famous general, so naturally, I couldn't bear to see his hair turn white. It was better for him to return to his original position. Because it was 1,000 more words than planned, it was a bit late. Also, because I wanted to write this explanation, it didn't count. Chapter 740. You have to be honest. The team members who woke up from the shock looked at Su Lu and said earnestly. Then, someone looked at the still confused little nurse Huang Li, who was the core of the matter, and asked hesitantly, "Does this count as cuckolding this young master?" Hearing the word cuckolding, Su Lu had some thoughts and memories. He looked up at the sky and said softly, "Nonsense. How is this cuckolding? At most, it's a blackpot." Outside the quiet hall of mansion number 11, it seemed to be an open space, but in fact, the sky was not exposed. The transparent membrane above the stone ground blocked the spring rain that fell on people's hair. The rain gently spread down in an arc, giving people a dreamy feeling. He sensed something and turned his head to look. He saw tonight's candidate for best male lead, that cold and gloomy plum blossom like the iron calculator family's seventh young master, walking through the main entrance of the mansion under the light of the rain. "Welcome back to the capital ring," Li Xiaotong said with a smile and patted Su Li's shoulder. He looked at the hall with a smile and asked, "All right, you know that a successful person like me, who makes hundreds of Federation coins per minute, has very little time. Who is the target of the face-slapping?" Everyone walked into the hall. Su Lu asked Huang Li to walk beside Li Xiaotong. He shook his head and said with emotion, "I hate face-slapping the most. I don't know the people at the table inside, and I don't even know what kind of people they are. The Federation's morality is really crumbling." On this night, the spring breeze was not intoxicating, and the spring rain was soft and lingering. The people who could enter mansion number 11 were naturally rich and noble. Anyone who stood up from the table was probably a famous person in the capital special district. Su Lu and the others couldn't sense the doubtful and displeased looks cast by those people. They walked directly to the table in the hall. The chaotic footsteps and the barbaric smell of sweat still seeped out from the soldiers in civilian clothes seemed to be somewhat out of place with the atmosphere of the mansion. There were 2 men and a woman sitting at the table. They were wearing low-key but exquisitely made clothes. There was cold but exquisitely made food on their plate. The man and woman, who looked like siblings, had exquisite but proud and indifferent smiles on their faces. The other man with slender fingers had a dignified appearance. On his wrist, he wore an exquisitely made but low-quality branded watch. The atmosphere of a gathering was disturbed by a group of unexpected guests, so they frowned in displeasure as they turned their heads. When the man with slender fingers saw Huang Li being pushed to the front by Su Lu and the others, a trace of surprise flashed through his eyes before he quickly calmed down. There was even a trace of a gentle smile hanging on the corner of his lips, giving off a very comfortable feeling. "Is this Dr. Jiang Rui?" Li Xiaotong gently held Huang Li's waist and looked at the man expressionlessly. His indifferent eyes glanced at the man's face and then moved to his slender fingers. He seemed to be very careless. His palm gently stroked the girl's waist to declare his sovereignty. Jiang Rui, the young chief surgeon of the Department of Cardiac Surgery in the Army General Hospital with the most promising prospects, looked at the scene in front of him and roughly understood what was going on. He gave an apologetic smile to his new girlfriend and her brother, whom she could not offend. He gently wiped the corner of his mouth and stood up. He looked at Huang Li with a sigh and said earnestly, "Huang Li, we are already in the past. Why can't you let it go? It's your freedom to like me, but it's also my freedom to like whoever I like. You are still young, and you still have a long life ahead of you. Can you not spend your energy on such a boring trick? He looked at Li Xiaodong, reached out his hand and said gently, "Hello, I think you may be Huang Li's current boyfriend. I can probably understand why she brought you here. This is definitely not a chance encounter, but a deliberate show-off. However, the problem is that we are men. There is no need to fight for personal feelings, right?" Li Xiaodong frowned. Of course, he would not shake hands with him. Dr. Jiang Rui was not angry. He smiled, turned to look at Huang Li, and continued to educate her in a very hidden and condescending tone. "Don't do this in the future. Do you think you can hurt my self-esteem because your current boyfriend can bring you to number 11 mansion? This is really childish. It will only make me feel that you are rude in front of your friends." From the beginning to now, it was basically Dr. Jiang Rui's performance. The girl who came from a famous family opposite the table had a faint mocking smile on her face. She did not even look at Huang Li, who was nervously twisting her fingers. They were not from the same world, so naturally, she was even stingy to show her anger. Su Lu and the others did not speak, because they were shocked by Dr. Jiang's words. What a sincere and proud man! What a righteous and awe-inspiring man! What a righteous and awe-inspiring man! Li Xiaodong seemed to have not expected this doctor to be such a person. His cold expression was somewhat relaxed. He looked at the other man who was still sitting in the chair and felt that he seemed to have seen him somewhere. He could not help but frown and ask, "My name is Li Xiaodong. Have I seen you somewhere before?" With his identity as the second successor of the Li family, no matter what kind of social situation he was in, there was no need for him to introduce himself first. However, today he was invited by Su Lu to slap his face, so he had to lower his status and say his name lightly. He hoped that the rich young master would be sensible enough to retreat and not affect Su Li's rare mood of slapping his face. Unexpectedly, after hearing Li Xiaodong's words, the brother and sister did not respond. The man in the light cyan embroidered formal suit slightly frowned, glanced at Li Xiaodong, and said, "I don't think we have met before." There was a moment of silence. Su Lu looked down at his shoes and said in a low voice, "There is actually someone who doesn't know you? Do you think I should know who you are?" The man in the light cyan formal suit showed a mocking expression on his face and said, "I know all the people I should know, but why should I know someone I shouldn't know?" Li Xiaodong's expression did not change, but the team members behind him gasped. Su Lu widened his small eyes and said with emotion, "We are here to slap his face. Why does it seem that we have been slapped in the face?" Li Xiaodong looked at him with a wry smile and said, "He doesn't even know me. How do you think we can slap his face?" Su Lu understood what he meant. It was probably the feeling of casting pearls before swine. He shook his head and said, "Today's arrangement is my fault. The level of the food chain is too far apart, so there is no deterrent effect. A lion catches a rabbit and the rabbit eats the carrot. The rabbit is afraid of the lion, but the carrot doesn't know the lion at all. That's the truth." Li Xiaodong loosened his hand from Huang Li's waist and spread his hands, saying, "You can't think that a random cat or dog can recognize me." When they were talking, they didn't even look at Dr. Jiang Rui and the brother and sister who claimed to be from a famous family. In their eyes, these words were just a very common discussion, and they didn't care about them at all. Especially in the ears of the man in the light cyan formal suit, it was an absolute provocation and ridicule. Number 11 Mansion was not an ordinary club, and the man in the light cyan formal suit was also a very important person. He didn't want to argue with Su Lu and the others. He waved his hand to call the manager on duty, who had been standing not far away, and said coldly, "What's going on? These guests all have electronic invitations." The mansion had already checked, and the manager said awkwardly, "Young Master Chen, since they have disturbed your meal, I will inform the security department to ask them to leave as soon as you ask." With the subtle gesture of the manager, the security guards in black formal suits in the corner of the restaurant surrounded them with white headphones. The place where the rich live is really interesting. Do you think you can pretend to be a member of the special task force by wearing white headphones? But when it comes to violence, we are very good at this kind of thing. Xiong Linquan suddenly interjected, and then took off his windbreaker. The expressions of the three people at the table, the manager of No. 11 Mansion and the security guards, changed dramatically. They were shocked to see the cold guns in the man's windbreaker, and their hands and feet suddenly froze. The Federation strictly controlled guns, and even the most famous underworld boss Zhang Xiaohua in Nankazhou didn't dare to show so many guns in a place like the mansion. So, there was only one explanation for the scene in front of them. The condescending look on the face of the young master surnamed Chen finally dissipated slowly. He put the napkin on the table and stared at the people in front of him. Finally, his eyes fell on Su Li's face, and he was shocked to recognize his identity. Sorry for the disrespect. You are actually a hero of the Federation. Young Master Chen's lips were a little pale, but he still smiled and said, I have heard some legends about you, but I really didn't expect to see you in such a jealous situation. My name is Chen Xianglin. Jiang Rue and my sister are engaged, so I can call him brother-in-law. Colonel Su Lu, I don't know what relationship you have with my brother-in-law's ex-girlfriend, but I think that even if you are a hero of the Federation, there is no reason for you to get involved in these emotional issues. Chen Xianglin was born in an extraordinary family, and he was a genius in the financial field. He had made a lot of achievements in the stock market when he was over 30 years old. After he set up a company, he was even described by financial magazines as a candidate for the future S1 business leader. Because of all these, he had developed a proud and unyielding personality. So, at this moment, even if he knew who was standing in front of him, he didn't have the slightest intention of backing down. When it came to the philosophical relationship between face-slapping and face-slapping, as well as the face of the Chen family, he really couldn't back down. He didn't want to be outdone and said, even if you are from the army, I think you should behave yourself here. Ordinary people may not know, but you should have heard of the 7 great families. Young Master Chen stared into Su Li's eyes and said, Number 11 Mansion is one of the properties of one of the families. How can you be so presumptuous? Besides, you are not very lucky. That young master happened to be here today. There was a strange silence. The members of Group 7, who had followed Su Lu into the manor of the Lin family, stared at this young master, not knowing what to say. Li Xiaotong shook his head, looked at Su Lu and said, It seems that he is not very clear about the things you have done. I am not as impulsive as before, Su Lu explained seriously. The restaurant of Mansion Number 11 was cleared out. The black-clothed security guards were holding folding taser batons and vigilantly looking at the people around the table. Not long after, the owner behind the scenes of the mansion finally appeared, and as soon as he appeared, it was 2 people. When Chen Xianglin saw the 2 young people, the indifference and pride on his face suddenly turned into kindness and gentleness, and there was even a hint of flattery on his face. When he saw the other person, his mood became extremely relaxed. With his status, he was able to get acquainted with the owner behind the scenes of this mansion, mainly because of the accidental introduction of that distant relative. Since that distant relative was also here today, there was even less to worry about. His sister beside him looked over there and shouted with a smile, Cousin. Dr. Jiang Rue looked at the scene in disbelief. He had never imagined that the Chen siblings, who were extremely arrogant and bossy in front of him, would have such a side to them. He was sensitive to the fact that the owner behind Mansion Number 13 should be a big shot with a very high status. However, he didn't know the distribution of the 7 legendary families, so he couldn't guess the identity of the 2 people, but his heart was also burning with passion. Looking at the 2 people, Li Xiaotong's expression became a little strange, while Su Lu tilted his head and looked over there as if he was looking at a clown, squinting his eyes. The Chun siblings and Dr. Jiang Rui went forward to greet them. They were about to say a few words to express their apologies for disturbing the mansion, and then take the opportunity to get closer to the two real young masters of aristocratic families. Unexpectedly, the two young masters didn't seem to see them at all and looked over there in astonishment. They also turned their heads and didn't know what happened there, but only saw Su Lu, Li Xiaotong, and others standing there calmly. Chen Xianglin was puzzled and said, "Cousin, 12th young master. 7th brother, why did you come in person?" The young master on the left opened his hands with an exaggerated expression and greeted Li Xiaotong. He said loudly, "I'm so excited and uneasy that you came in person to eat in such a shabby place." "Cousin, what did 12th young master just say?" Miss Chen asked with some confusion. "The 7th brother of 12th young master is naturally 7th young master Li." The young master who was called cousin looked over there nervously and roared in a hoarse and angry voice, "You two idiots, how did you offend them?" Li Xiaotong? Chen Xianglin's face suddenly turned pale. 3 years ago, he should have seen this legendary 7th young master Li in a top nightclub with his grumpy distant cousin. But why didn't he think of it today? Why didn't he realize it even after Li Xiaotong told him his name? A young business leader? A genius in the financial world? Li Xiaotong was the second successor of the Li family. He didn't need to do anything at all. He only needed to look at him, and his life would be ruined completely. I know all the people I should know, but why should I know the people I shouldn't know? Suddenly, he thought of the words he had said earlier. At that time, he felt that his words were very powerful. Now, he understood what the other party meant by Tom, Dick, and Harry. He realized that his words were just a slap to his own face. It was a very powerful slap. Li Xiaotong didn't know that this mansion was an inconspicuous property of the Li family, and he didn't know how to answer this distant cousin's enthusiastic and exaggerated greeting. Although he had a high status in the hearts of the elders of the family, he definitely deserved this kind of enthusiasm and even flattery. However, he didn't know how to answer this question, so he just kept silent with a sullen face. A direct descendant of one of the 7 great families, who had the right of succession, had pretended to be the boyfriend of a commoner girl and played a childish game of face-slapping. Moreover, that commoner girl had a few dazzling freckles. Had such a thing ever happened in history? Li Xiaotong was scared by his silence and didn't dare to ask more questions. However, he instantly found the existence of Su Lu, so he started to greet him even more enthusiastically and exaggeratedly. For a young master who was raised by a family like the House of Prophet, sometimes he would be a playboy, sometimes he would be shameless, but most of the time he would show the extreme characteristics of a successful businessman. Just look at the enthusiasm of this 12th young master towards the members of Group 7. After a few short conversations, he knew the purpose of Li Xiaotong and Su Li's visit to number 11 mansion today. Although he didn't think it was a big deal, his face darkened without hesitation. He walked to the Chen siblings and Dr. Jiang Rui and stared at them without saying a word. Under such strong pressure, Chen Xianglin began to sweat. However, he was a successful person with shrewdness and courage. He pursed his lips, and his forehead was full of sweat, but he refused to lower his head. He said to the man beside him, "Cousin, although this is a young man's emotional problem, it is a family matter after all." In his opinion, as long as his cousin was willing to stand up for him, then even the terrifying iron schemer would give him some face. Sure enough, Li Xiaotong looked at them silently for a moment and said to Su Lu next to him, "You know that the relationship between our two families has always been very good. It is not convenient for me to do anything." Su Lu looked down at the shoes on his feet, as if he was recalling the feeling of stepping on the beach. He suddenly raised his head, stared at the cousin who was regarded as the strongest supporter by the Chen siblings and Dr. Jiang Rui, and asked seriously, "There was a very clear clause in the agreement between your brother and me. As long as I am still alive, you can't step into S1. I want to know, where are your feet now? There was silence. The Chen siblings and Dr. Jiang Rui were shocked to hear so much from this sentence, especially Child Chen. Only now did he know that the reputation of the 7 families didn't seem to be very useful in front of Su Lu. Even that colonel seemed to have done something before. Cousin Lin Daohai took a deep breath, forcibly suppressed the humiliation and anger in his heart, and said angrily, I will go back to S3 right away, okay? Of course not, I want an explanation. Su Lu narrowed his eyes and looked at him. Why are you in S1? What kind of person is Lin Banshan? How can he go back on his words? If he doesn't know how to discipline his brother, I don't mind disciplining him again. Are you being reasonable? You are already a colonel, are you still being reasonable? Lin Daohai waved his arms angrily and shouted, Don't use Lin Banshan as an example. If you really dare to do anything to me, just kill me. As soon as the words came out, Lin Daohai's voice suddenly stopped. The bloody and humiliating experience in the past few years made him understand that a terrifying human like Su Lu was not a target he could deal with. What was even more annoying was that this guy really dared to kill him. Thinking of this, his momentum softened and he explained in a low voice, After you were taken captive to the Empire, the entire Federation thought you were dead. I thought the agreement would naturally be cancelled, so I went back to S1. Your explanation makes sense, but now you already know that I am still alive, Su Lu reminded him. I will go right away, directly to S3. Lin Daohai gave him a hateful look, turned around, and walked out of the mansion without saying anything. He didn't say anything to Li Xiaodong, didn't say a word to anyone, and left in a very straightforward manner. The Chen siblings had always thought that the Lin family, one of the 7 great families, was their most solid support in the Federation. This feeling was probably similar to what Su Lu thought when he saw the old man in the military prison of Qinqing. The problem was that until the old man died, no one dared to touch him, but Su Lu had never been afraid to confront the authority of the 7 great families, and in the past, he had won. Today, Lin Daohai left in a huff, which was the aftermath of his past achievements. Chen Xianglin, who had lost all hope, glanced at Li Xiaodong, who was drinking at the bar in the distance with a pale face, and said with a nervous smile, I think, this Miss Huang is not the girlfriend of the 7th young Master Li. You all came here specifically to slap my face, but I don't understand why. I know myself, although I have some status in the industry, I am definitely not qualified to be slapped in the face like this. Actually, I don't understand why this happened either. Su Lu shrugged and said, It's probably all Mr. Shi's fault. Of course, they didn't know who Mr. Shi was, let alone know that he had anything to do with the story that happened in the rainy night. Su Lu turned to look at Miss Chen, who was in a daze, and said expressionlessly, Cancel the engagement. Miss Chen was shocked, but Chen Xianglin said without hesitation, Okay. Su Li's voice became gentler, and he looked at Miss Chen and said, Miss, don't be with this kind of man in the future. Okay. As usual, Chen Xianglin quickly agreed. Then, under Su Li's gaze, he pulled his sister out of the restaurant. Miss Chen sadly turned around and looked at her former fiancé. She pleaded with a trembling voice, Don't kill him. Getting married to a prestigious family, being sponsored to become one of the best doctors in the Federation, and having a meteoric rise in the Federation, all of these had turned into bubbles in an instant. The dignified Dr. Jiang Rui's face was pale, as if he had lost his soul. He raised his head and stared at Nurse Huang Li, who had been silent all this time, and shouted in a shrill voice, Are you satisfied now? What did I do wrong to you? How can you treat me like this? What do you want to do? Then he looked at Su Lu and the others and shouted angrily, You are all real big shots. Why do you have to make things difficult for a poor doctor like me? I just want to live a better life. Is that wrong? As I said, it's all Mr. Shi's fault. Su Lu paused for a moment, looked at him, and frowned. But it's not a glorious thing to abandon someone. And I hate men like you the most. You're wrong, but you always think you're right. What's wrong with you? Maybe it was because he thought of his messy love life, but his mood suddenly became very bad. He took a cigarette from Xiong Linquan and lit it. I'm a man. Don't you think you can force me to give up my love in this way? Dr. Jiang Rui's eyes were bloodshot. He waved his arms and looked at Huang Li with hatred. Even if I die, I won't marry you. I don't know if you're acting to prove that you're loyal to love so that we can let Huang Li marry you, so that you can get to know us and the seventh young master of the Li family. After a long speech, Su Lu almost coughed. He casually pointed at Dr. Jiang's nose with the finger that was holding the cigarette and said, "If that's the case, your acting skills are not bad. But don't worry, even if Nurse Huang is really stupid and crazy enough to fall in love with you again, we will not allow this to happen." He put the cigarette in his mouth and took a deep breath. He looked down at the second letter on the screen of his phone and read it calmly. After the face-slapping of the freckled beauty's ex-boyfriend is over, he is not allowed to fall in love for 5 years. He is not allowed to visit prostitutes and can only use guns. Su Lu raised his head and looked at Dr. Jiang Rui, who had a look of disbelief on his face, and explained, "As I said, everything is Mr. Shi's fault. As for these specific measures, they are all his instructions in his will. I have to practice them one by one." Huang Li, who was behind him, burst out laughing. "Don't try to fall in love or visit prostitutes behind our backs," Su Lu kindly reminded him. "You've seen the documentary that won the Nebula Award, right? We're a very professional team. From today on, your life will be full of eavesdropping and remote peeping. Once you violate the rules, I can't guarantee what will happen." "That's too much." Dr. Jiang Rui lowered his head and said in pain, "Even if I've made mistakes, you've gone too far. How can you be so unreasonable?" "Reasonable? My teacher said that there is no such thing as reason in this universe," Su Lu said calmly. After a slight pause, he suddenly raised his voice and sounded particularly angry. "If it was reasonable, why would that guy lie on the car and never wake up?" Then it was Huang Li's turn to speak. She sobbed to her ex-boyfriend, Dr. Jiang Rui, and said, "Although you didn't mess with me, and I don't think that a breakup means being abandoned, I can't accept the way we broke up. I can't accept the vicious words you said to get rid of me as quickly as possible. I'm not a clingy person, but since you made me unhappy, I'm going to pester you and make you unhappy too." She raised her head and stared at her ex-boyfriend's face. Bravely, she cried, "I've been buying lunch for you for 7 months, and washing your socks and underwear for 6 months. You owe me all that, and I want to take it back." A series of crisp slaps sounded. Huang Li clearly slapped her ex-boyfriend 6 times on the left side of his face and 7 times on the right side of his face. Although she didn't use much strength, she still slapped Dr. Jiang's face until it was red and swollen. It was beautiful. Huang Li wiped away her tears with her reddened palms. She bowed deeply to Su Lu and the members of Group 7. "Then," she said, "then I'll be leaving." Li Xiaotong, who was drinking at the bar, saw this scene. His hand that was holding the wine glass slightly froze. Looking at this girl with freckles, he felt that she looked like a person. No, it should be said that her temperament was very similar to a person. She had a piercingly cold aura that was rarely seen in girls. The team members applauded the girl enthusiastically. Only now did they realize that under the gentle and kind appearance of this young nurse hid such a strong heart. It was no wonder that Shi Qinghai had such a bizarre story before his death, and still couldn't forget this chance encounter after his death. "Hooligan." Su Lu smiled and said to the beautiful man in the black freezer in the carriage outside the mansion, "I've done what you asked me to do. You can close your peach blossom eyes now. Then, I should go and do the rest of our business. This title will take a long time. This is 7,000 words, 2 in 1. As for the face-slapping incident, It's purely Mr. Sher's hobby. It's not what some of my friends expect from the seventh family. Although I like to play with very crude conspiracies and coincidences, I won't use them like this every time. I thought about it for a long time yesterday, and I felt that I really wanted to write this paragraph. The young nurse is Cinderella, and Sher Qinghai is the prince. Is Su Lu the thug? Anyway, this kind of dream is actually a very happy thing. I hope you like it. To be honest, I just feel that this is very artistic, so I like it. As I said before, if being a hipster is a disease, I won't treat it even if I'm beaten to death. Chapter 741. The misty rain on a spring night would disturb one's dreams, so it was not a good time to fall into a dark and sweet dream. Furthermore, Su Lu and the others still had a lot of important matters to attend to, so they occupied the 11th mansion and began to drink. The 12th young master of the Li family enthusiastically accompanied them for a few drinks, then tactfully left in advance. At this time, Su Lu saw Brother Xing beside Li Xiaotong. He respected Brother Xing, who was like a spear, so he went up to him and greeted him. Brother Xing nodded. He still waited silently behind 7th young master Li like before, but there were a few specks of white on his sideburns. Li Xiaotong looked at this scene and couldn't help but sigh. In the Federation, only Su Lu was more polite and serious when he saw his bodyguards. It was probably because of this personality that many people admired Su Lu, such as the president. Then, there were even more people who wanted Su Lu dead, such as the big shots in the government and the military. Li Xiaotong poured the remaining wine into the ashtray to extinguish the cigarette. He frowned and said, "No one wants you to come back to the capital ring at this time." Su Lu raised his glass and clinked it with the team members in the distance. He took 2 sips and replied vaguely with the cigarette in his mouth, "Many people have expressed similar intentions." Li Xiaotong shook his head and said, "Everyone knows why you were exiled to the West Woods. They can roughly guess why Mr. Sher did what he did. Now that Mr. Byron is dead, he's dead, and the investigation on the ancient clock hasn't been restarted. Now that you're back." His eyebrows were like the branches of a plum blossom that had been frozen in the snow. He frowned slightly. "Everyone is scared. They are worried that you will go crazy like you did when you killed Macklin. Even the old man in my family has touched the round hat more often than before. It is obvious that he is anxious about your return. In the end, no one expected that other than going to the police station on this rainy night, you actually didn't do anything else. Instead, you spent a lot of energy fighting for that woman's affection. This matter is really puzzling. It's mainly to satisfy Sher Qinghai's craving." Su Lu looked at him and said with a smile, "It's really embarrassing for you to do this personally." Li Xiaotong shook his head and said with a self-deprecating smile, "As long as you don't go crazy, even if you ask me to take off my clothes and act as a clown, I'm willing to do it, let alone play a boring face-slapping scene for you. Is it that bad?" Su Lu frowned and found it funny. "You're the biggest investment in my life." Li Xiaotong looked at him solemnly and said slowly, "The past few years have proven that the elders in my family have long accepted that no matter if you are a soldier or a felon locked up in Qinqing, as long as you don't die, my investment will definitely benefit. Therefore, I sincerely hope that you will learn to control your anger and learn to cherish your own body. In my eyes, your life is much more precious than other people's. In anyone's eyes, their own life was definitely the most precious thing in the universe. However, because the law of nature had already cast the spell that all living things would wither, people had to accept it sadly and then try to find a way to leave with more happiness. For example, they could find a reason that was more emotional than death, or they could die on the path they freely chose. Last night, under the lingering spring rain, Su Lu and his comrades had quietly chosen a grave for the guy in the car to rest in. It was early in the morning, and this was the Xinghe Public Cemetery. Su Lu put the white bouquet in his hand in front of Professor Shin's grave, and then walked to the tombstone next to it. Looking at the rain-soaked handwriting on the tombstone, he smiled slightly. Shi Qinghai's family background and a brief description were written on the tombstone. The epitaph was chosen by Su Lu. It was a very powerful sentence picked out from the letter many years ago. These words were sonorous and powerful, but they were not blindly serious, which was very much like Mr. Shi's character. I have already died on the path I chose, but you have to live well, and live with a clear conscience. Back then, when Su Lu had read the letter Shi Qinghai had left behind in the restaurant, he had seen the line about choosing his own path. He had come to a realization. If a person could die on the path they had chosen, it would be a kind of peaceful happiness. So today, he had engraved this line of words on the other person's tombstone. Artistic young people generally have short lives. Holding a black umbrella and holding her son's hand, Zhou stood in the cold rain and looked at the grave in front of her with a mocking expression on her face. Zhou Liuhua, who was already 4 or 5 years old, opened his big black eyes curiously and looked at the cement mound in front of him. Of course, he didn't know that the person lying in the mound was his father, but he was very unhappy that his mother's hand was so cold and hard that it hurt a little. Little boys were as dangerous and flustered as animals, but they also had some kind of sensitive perception ability. According to his usual character, Zhou Liuhua should have already made a big fuss, but when he felt the strange atmosphere in the cemetery garden and the pain from his hand, he didn't make a sound. Su Lu glanced at Zhou Yu and found that she still had a small red flower in her hair today. He didn't know what material it was made of, but the bright red petals were stained with the powder scattered by the spring rain, making them look bright and beautiful. He didn't know when it started. Perhaps it was because of the pain of her dream being shattered, and Mou crying on the highway, but after she matured very quickly, Zhou Yu, in addition to liking to wear red clothes, also fell in love with red flowers. Although until the end, you didn't get together again. Su Lu spread out his hands and said, "But I thought that on this kind of occasion, you should at least change the color of the flower." Zhou Yu was silent for a long time. Although she was quiet, a smile suddenly flashed across her naturally charming face. She said, "He said that red flowers are beautiful." 5 years ago, in the same cemetery, in the same rain, Su Lu officially took the heavy responsibility of taking care of Zhou Yu and the child in her belly for Shi Qinghai. 5 years later, the little life in her belly had grown into a healthy little boy. Zhou Yu was still beautiful, Su Lu was still carrying all kinds of pots, and Shi Qinghai was already sleeping underground. Time really did change a lot of things. "Liuhua is going to play the piano tonight. Let's have supper," she said. "Okay," Su Lu replied. Zhou Yu took the child and turned to leave. She didn't hesitate, and it was extremely simple. Su Lu looked at her back that disappeared in the spring rain. After a moment of silence, he made a phone call. In the rain, he lowered his voice and frowned, saying, "Mr. Hello, I'm Su Lu." Chapter 742. In the early morning of late spring, the air that had been washed many times by last night's rain carried a fresh smell. It blew from the lawn in front of the official residence's terrace and blew on the girl's face. Miss Padil, the only daughter of the Federation president, was 14 years old this year. She was still thin, and her face was pale and serene, even a little too serene. She was wearing a white gauze dress today, hiding herself behind the curtain of the terrace, avoiding the vigilant Special Task Force agents in front of the terrace. Her fingers tightly grasped the phone, and her slightly thick lips opened and closed many times before she said slowly with great difficulty and shyness to the other end of the phone, "Yes, Su. Lieutenant Colonel Lo, father is ready to go out, you want to meet him." "Okay, I understand what you mean." The first daughter of the Federation, who had been autistic since childhood and had slightly improved in recent years, chuckled after hearing Su Li's promise on the phone. She probably thought that the orthodontic lines on her teeth were not good looking, so she quickly covered her mouth and nodded hard at the phone. Su Lu did not have much personal contact with the president's residence. After all, the president of the Federation had a busy schedule and could not have much personal time. Mr. Pabre once mocked himself during a meal that the president of the Federation's body belonged to the Federation, not his wife. However, compared to the average person, Su Li's relationship with the most powerful family in the Federation could be considered quite close. He had had dinner with that special family of 3 many times. As for Miss Padil, Su Lu had relatively little contact with her. After all, a girl who had been troubled by autism needed special protection from her family. However, there were occasional letters, and he remembered to send a few small gifts. Just as this story had taken more than 2 million words to tell, and just as Shi Qinghai had praised it one year, Su Lu, this small-eyed man, had become less and less talkative since he began to flee, but the special smell or charm on him had become stronger and stronger. Was that why so many girls in the Federation and even the Imperium thought that he was very trustworthy? Standing in the drizzle in Xinghe Public Cemetery, standing under the commemorative tree, Su Lu lowered his voice and patiently explained something to the president's daughter on the other end of the phone. He explained something, made an agreement, and then promised something with a smile. After carefully exhorting her, he finally hung up the phone in relief. To the Southern Suburbs Division, Su Lu said. The dark green motorcade left the cemetery along the winding mountain road, leaving behind 2 graves and 2 bouquets of flowers. Unbeknownst to them, the familiar black car without a logo had snuck into the convoy. At this time, Su Lu was sitting in the back of the black car. Through the infantry team's field command system, he was giving orders to the team members in the front and back of the military vehicles. 3 high points. Mark out the precise shooting angles. He pulled out the scroll screen in front of his phone and stared at the high-precision map on the screen with narrowed eyes. He used his finger to tap on a few hidden spots on the map. There are people from the other side here. Gu Shifeng, who was sitting beside him, flicked her round fingers and quickly marked out the coordinate. Then, she entered the team's operation target into the workbench. After thinking for a while, she added a sentence into the comms system. The other side is an expert from the army. What we need to do is control. Be careful. At this time, they were preparing to go to the 17th Division's base in the southern suburbs. After all, Su Lu was a soldier of the Federation. He had disobeyed orders and returned to the capital ring. Yesterday, he had spent the rainy night mourning and burying his friends. Now, he had to report back to his own unit. Under the overpass on Highway 3, here. This is the temporary military training base of the capital garrison's mecha brigade. The problem is that 2 mechas were moved to the base yesterday, but they haven't been warmed up yet. Su Lu drew a circle on a certain spot on the screen and then heavily tapped on it. I'll go and watch them myself. Gu Shifeng quickly replied, when they're warmed up, I'll do a waveband overlap. There's a 70% chance that they'll wedge into the cores of those 2 mechas. The fleet drove quietly on the smooth roads in the suburbs of the capital. Other than the clear and short replies from Su Lu and his team members, there was only silence in the command system. Occasionally, there would be a minute of silence. This caused the fleet to have a very complicated feeling. Yesterday, when they received Su Lu at the Old Moon base, Team 7 had been vigilantly observing their surroundings. Although there was no actual danger, with so many Federation government departments following them at Charter Square and the cautiousness of their boss, they knew that the seemingly peaceful road ahead was actually filled with storms. They just didn't know when they would roll up or calm down. Gu Shifeng, who used an extremely short amount of time to complete the electronic signal conversion and synchronization channel setup, suddenly raised her head and asked, "Boss, this is the Capital Special District after all. Do you really think that those people would dare to go against you so openly? No matter what, you're still the successor personally chosen by the war god." It was very quiet in the black car. Su Lu lowered his head in silence, thinking about how to answer this question. In order to prevent him from returning to the capital ring and uncovering the truth, those people were not stingy with physical destruction. In order to achieve their goal, they had even inconceivably mobilized the battleships of the Federal fleet. They were already so crazy that they naturally wouldn't care that this was the capital special district and that the war god cared about him. Furthermore, the war god was already dead and buried in Philadelphia, and that person's relationship with the war god was much closer than his own. Those people really want me dead. He looked at the scrolling information on the screen and explained, but you don't have to worry too much. The key is to control the sniping position. Once that is controlled, they won't be able to do anything. Speaking up to this point, he raised his head and said to Gu Shifeng, "Remove that mecha backup station from the safety list. You don't have to deal with it personally." Gu Shifeng didn't quite understand. In the front row of the black car sat the two people with the best driving skills of Group 7, Lu Jiao and Da Vinci. Da Vinci suddenly frowned and asked, "Boss, what if the other party uses a powerful weapon? You have to know that no one dares to underestimate your freakish combat ability. Normal combat units can't even break through our defense, so how can they hurt you?" Su Lu couldn't explain this point. Now, he was covered in a faint layer of the glory of the Charter. Any large-scale weapon that required chip control and could receive long-range signals, such as powerful military mechas and fighter jets, or even those giant Federation battleships, could no longer threaten his safety. The more powerful and terrifying a military machine was, the more likely it was to be turned into a pile of scrap metal in front of him. Just like what had happened in that space, when his life was in danger, as far as his eyes could see, and as far as his fingertips could reach, there would be only peace. In a sense, with the support of the glory of the Charter, he was a passive and omnipotent god. Unfortunately, gods weren't omnipotent. Su Lu couldn't control the human body and simple, primitive, and never outdated killing weapons like guns. This point just happened to prove Uncle Feng Yu's theory. The simplest was the most powerful. In order to survive in this special capital city full of hidden chaos and killing intent, as well as to obtain the final victory, Su Lu needed the help of the members of Group 7. Moreover, he was confident that with the help of these 20 or so members, he could accurately eliminate all the dangerous factors ahead of him. This was the question that Gu Shifeng had hidden in the deepest part of her heart all this time. Only now did she ask, "Boss, the accuracy of your information is too terrifying." He used his chubby finger to quickly and nervously point at the accurately marked sniper positions on the electronic map. Looking at the detailed annotations, including the production date of the sniper's equipment, he could not hide his shock and said, "Just like last night in Charter Square. Where did you get this information? If you can get such amazing information every time you fight a battle, then what's the point of the enemy?" Su Lu scratched his head. After a moment of silence, he smiled and explained, "Well, I have someone up there." "Someone up there? Who is it?" Gu Shifeng and Da Vinci in the front row raised their heads at the same time and stared at the flat roof of the black car. They wanted to see through the hard bulletproof material and see the mysterious, powerful, and terrifying information provider. After the reorganization of the new 17th Division, they naturally couldn't stay in the Harbor City Garrison Guard District. They were directly transferred back to the southern suburbs of the special capital city. Only the black car that Su Lu was in and a dark green military vehicle that was leading the way had arrived at the southern suburbs. The rest of the vehicles and the swift and fierce soldiers were nowhere to be found. Division Commander Yu Chunghai was sick and was admitted to the Army General Hospital. He was about to be transferred to a military hospital in the southern hemisphere, so Su Lu didn't see the old soldier that he wanted to see the most and respected the most. The black car quietly drove out of the gate of the new 17th Division like a ghost. Su Lu sat by the window and silently looked at the clear map of the military forces around the special capital city. His mood became slightly heavier. The permanent troops in the capital city garrison were 4 special class divisions. Most of them were from the 1st Military Region, and that didn't include the new 17th Division and the Iron 7th Division. If Division Commander Yu Cheng-hai was really sick, then the new 17th Division would definitely be greatly affected. Who was the one who made the law in the 1st Military Region? Who transferred all the troops loyal to the Zhong family from the West Woods Military Region to the Empire's front line? Who made the Iron 7th Division not return to S3 but forcefully stay beside the special capital city? Thinking of the name of that general, Su Lu was silent. Then he frowned and felt a pain in his forehead. Then a thunderous sound suddenly sounded in his ears. Bang! A bullet from a sniper rifle came out of nowhere and accurately hit the window of the black car, right next to Su Li's cheek, and a flower of pain burst out of the window. If it weren't for the strong protection of the Qianshi Tai family's black car, this shot would definitely have blown his head into a pile of bloody mud. Su Lu turned his head and looked at the terrifying Dan Hen in front of him. His eyelashes didn't even blink. After a moment of silence, as if nothing had happened, he lowered his head and continued reading. Chapter 743. Then came the second shot. This bullet hit the original bullet mark with exceptional precision. The deviation was so small that it was negligible. An astonishing muffled sound rang out, and the window that looked like it was blooming like a flower petal started to waver again. In the spring breeze, it looked like it was drifting, but in fact there was no substantial damage. Judging from the sound of the bullet exploding and the smooth movement of the heavy black car on the road, the sniper should be using a light anti-material long-range firearm. This type of firearm could directly penetrate the side armor of the Federation military armored vehicle. The accuracy of the 2 consecutive shots also fully demonstrated the exceptional military skills of the sniper. However, this time, Su Lu didn't even bother to turn his head to look. He looked at the screen thoughtfully, as if he didn't feel anything. He was as calm as the wind and clouds, like a damned artistic youth who was quietly reading in the midst of a sky full of bullets. The terrifying bullets heavily knocked against the window beside his face, but he was so calm. It definitely wasn't because he needed to act calm in this situation to win the excited screams and cheers of the girls, nor was it because he had the thickest nerves in the universe, even thicker than Huai Caoshi's. It was because as the best of the best engineers, under the premise of having a plan in place, rational analysis and deduction gave him enough calmness to face all of this. He didn't want to see a shooting scene that would shock the Federation on the streets of the southern suburbs of the capital special district. Therefore, after splitting into 2 groups, Team 7 quietly bypassed the snipers on the rooftops of most of the buildings. As for the sniper on the southeast side of the 6-story residential building, Team 7 had already been monitoring him. As for the possible damage this sniper could cause, Su Lu firmly believed that the light, long-range anti-material gun could penetrate the side armor of the armored vehicle, but it definitely couldn't penetrate the black car he was in. Years ago in the underground parking lot of the Linhai State Gymnasium, the Federation's M52 Mechas 6-barreled Darlin's autocannon fired wildly at close range. The Tai family's specially made black car seemed to be hopping up and down miserably, struggling and whining. However, in the end, Butler Jean gently stepped on the gas pedal, and the black car was still full of power and escaped with the skinny crown prince. What's more, he was enduring a long-range attack today. The effect of these 2 shots was at most like a tree branch poking at a bison's body, making it itchy and restless, but they couldn't pierce through that layer of solid skin. Xiong Linquan, who was hiding on the hill, silently pulled the trigger. Through the optical scope, he could clearly see a plume of smoke rising from the corner of the top floor of the 6-story residential building. He couldn't see the person's movement, but he knew that he had succeeded. He quickly tore off his camouflage and rushed to the military vehicle that was waiting at the bottom of the hill. At the top of the residential building's balcony, The military sniper, wearing a dark green stealth windbreaker, leaned against the wall. He held the bullet wound on his left shoulder and breathed heavily. Blood kept flowing out from between his fingers as he stared at the beautiful bullet point on the opposite wall. His face was very pale. The wooden door in front of the balcony was kicked open, and 3 members of Group 7 rushed in at high speed. Their triangular formation was flawless, and they found their targets in the shortest amount of time possible. Furthermore, they used the black muzzle of their guns to announce the victory of this ambush. A member of Group 7 named Sure Hang looked at the sniper in the corner, who was trying to take out a military knife. His finger quickly pressed the button on the flashlight and advised in a low voice, "Brother, there are no casualties on either side right now. Don't make things too difficult." The sniper quieted down. He held his left shoulder and stared at the dark green windbreaker that was getting redder and redder. He stood up with great difficulty and made a decisive decision. He looked at the 3 members of Group 7 and smiled apologetically. His body suddenly leaned back, and just like that, he flipped over the wall and jumped down. He reached the top of the 6-story building in an instant. His body landed heavily on the ground, making a muffled cracking sound. All the blood in his body that was wrapped in the dark green windbreaker seemed to have gushed out in an instant. The cold concrete floor was like an oil painting, and the flowers in the painting were as red and as beautiful as the flowers in the painting. In the back of the black car, Gu Shifeng stared at the electronic monitoring map on the screen of the workbench and listened to the reports of the various groups. His chubby fingers kept sliding and swiping across the screen, and his slightly furrowed brows showed the anxiety and uneasiness in his heart. We didn't manage to capture him alive. He took off his headphones and looked at Su Lu beside him. He said in a low voice, "I checked the body of the one who jumped off the building. The proportion of rust on his body was too high. I hacked into the Coastal Defense Team's database to do a comparison. This sniper is from the Sea Wolves Special Forces." Sulu was not surprised. He narrowed his eyes and looked through the popped flower on the window. He looked at the green forest that quickly passed by the side of the road and seriously considered the situation he was facing. Mr. Sure killed his way into Parliament Hill. Many people on the list died and many were injured. He originally thought that there was not much left for him to do, but when he found out that the general was actually the most powerful and hidden hand, he realized that he had still underestimated his opponent's strength. Because of the existence of the general, the federal military had naturally formed a thick wall. This wall was trying to suffocate him and bury him directly in the ruins of history. Even if they could not do this for the time being, they had successfully blocked him from the official residence. Unless President Pabre did not want to see him, it would be very difficult to explain the problems that had happened in the past few days. However, this situation was impossible. There are a few locations that I need to pay attention to in the Department of National Defense building. I don't want to be the first colonel of the Federation to have his head blown off when he walks out of the building. After a moment of silence, Su Lu calmed down. He pointed at a building on the electronic map and said to Gu Shifeng with a smile, "You don't have to deal with the locations A and B, those are the department's daily sniping and surveillance points. Also, remind De Xiong and the others to be careful and not cause any misunderstandings." The secretary tactfully left the minister's office after making the tea. Ever since Secretary Jiao committed suicide due to treason, the Secretariat of the Department of National Defense was very careful about this. Minister of National Defense Zhou Yingxing took off his metal-rimmed glasses and gently rubbed his forehead. He did not hide his tiredness in front of Su Lu and said in a low voice, "Every action has a purpose. You violated military discipline and orders from your superiors and forcibly returned to the capital ring from the West Woods. What's your purpose? Of course, it's not as simple as just collecting Shi Qinghai's body. I just received a report that there was a shooting incident in the residential area of Yenshursan in the southern suburbs. There was a large amount of firepower and firearms in the incident. Does this have anything to do with you? Someone in the military wants to kill me. When I came back from the West Woods, I encountered 3 battleships. They came from Quasi 355 base. In order to kill me, they did not hesitate to sacrifice the entire battleship I was on. As for the shooting incident you mentioned, I don't know if it's the aftermath or the beginning of a new story. What we found out now is that the sniper was from the Navy Special Forces. Sulu would not hide anything in front of Minister Zhou. On one hand, it was because he trusted this low-key and sincere Federation general. On the other hand, the conflict of interests between the two sides was too deep. It would be difficult for Zhou Yingxing to gain anything by betraying him. Quasi 355 base is very remote. The Federal fleet usually does not use their battleship. Zhou Yingxing said calmly, as for the Navy, which is in a semi-disbanded state, the management of its special forces is relatively lax. It is very difficult to find out anything. Also, you should know that even if I can find out, I can't. It had nothing to do with the balance of the overall situation. It was Zhou Yingxing's direct description. In the federal military system, there were 3 people who assisted the president in defense. They were the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the National Security Advisor, and the Minister of Defense. Especially the Minister of Defense, as a member of the government cabinet, had the most direct power to mobilize the military. However, this was under normal circumstances. If there was a serious problem inside and outside the federal government, and the troops began to disobey the federal government's orders, then the head of the civilian organization, the Minister of Defense, because he didn't have a field army that he could directly command like the commanders of the military region and had extremely far-reaching influence, he would become marginal. Mr. President once ordered you to thoroughly investigate the case of the ancient bell. All the problems after that were caused by this investigation. Although Mr. President's order was revoked, I think with your personality, you will definitely continue to investigate. Yes, sure, Qinghai and I have found enough evidence to prove that Vice President Byron, several members of Parliament, the current director of the Bureau of Proclamation, and several generals were involved in the ancient bell incident. They stopped me from coming back because they were worried that I would continue to investigate, or they were worried that I would use the evidence found to send them to court. Su Lu held the teacup in front of him. After a moment of silence he continued, "The problem now is that if we want to go through the judicial channel to investigate, I need Mr. President to authorize or directly sign an order for the Ministry of Justice to take over. I'm very happy that you have this idea. We are the soldiers of the Federation. The military is not a tool for private people to vent their anger. However, when it comes to the special authorization of the Ministry of Justice, Mr. President." Minister Zhou looked out of the window at the green trees that looked like stars in the sky and said slowly, "Since the Parliament Hill incident, I haven't seen Mr. President. I didn't participate in the Parliament Hill Memorial Ceremony. I didn't participate in the cabinet meetings. Sometimes when I sit in this office and look at the ant-like people on the streets of the capital special district, I feel very uncomfortable sitting in this chair. Because now in the military, most people don't seem to want me to continue to be the Minister of Defense." Sulu looked at his tired and calm face and said, "You are the Minister of Defense appointed by Mr. President and voted by the Parliament Hill. The ordinary soldiers don't understand that the Federation's continuous attacks on the homeland of the Empire have been winning. But don't the generals understand the important role you played? Why should they ask you to step down? Reasons are always the most abundant thing in the universe." Minister Zhou sipped his tea and said with a smile, "My secretary was involved in the ancient bell incident, suspected of treason, and murdered the commander of the West Woods military region. This alone is enough reason for me to step down." Chapter 744. In the spacious minister's office on the top floor of the Ministry of National Defense building, the spring scenery in the distant alleys struggled to pass through the distance and projected a pitiful amount of light onto the glass. Minister Zhou calmly put down his teacup and rubbed his nose that had a red mark because of the glasses. He smiled and said, "You must know that some people in the government are questioning why Shi Qinghai happened to hold Yuzi hostage after killing so many people in Parliament Hill. I even heard that some people have started to ask lip-reading experts to analyze what Yuzi said to your friend." Su Li's straight black eyebrows couldn't help but furrow like a twisted blade. He stared at the tea in front of him, which was still as tall as before, and subconsciously shook his head. After a moment, he asked in a deep voice, "Madam, what do you mean now? I have already told her everything I know. After knowing the truth of the ancient bell explosion, what is she and the other families going to do?" For many years, Minister Zhou Yingxing had a distinct Thai family background. After Mr. Pabre became the president, as part of the political agreement, he directly became the Federation's Minister of National Defense. At that time, he could even be seen as a strong spokesperson for the government and the military. However, as he gradually showed his courage and ability in the position of Minister of National Defense, he received recognition and praise from the President and many other officers of the Federation. His factionalism had faded a lot. Madam and the others will probably choose to continue watching. After all, the General's reputation has always been excellent, and the damage now hasn't affected the families themselves. As a millennial family that has secretly influenced and even controlled the Federation for countless years, the crazy ideas of the past few years are probably just some kind of repetitive game in their eyes. However, they don't understand that once the armed army starts to rush forward, it will be a dangerous situation that has never been seen before in history. "Do you still remember what I said in the past?" Minister Zhou mocked with a faint smile. "The army is not allowed to have independent thoughts. Once this happens, it will become very scary." The old man said something similar. "As a soldier of the Federation, I have always remembered it." Su Lu replied, "I'm glad that you remember. I'm disappointed that more soldiers have forgotten." Minister Zhou slightly frowned. He looked out of the window again and said indifferently, "There's something you may not know yet. Half an hour ago, Commander Yu Chenghai was transferred from the Army General Hospital to the exclusive hospital of the 1st Military Region. His resignation letter and medical diagnosis were divided into two and placed on the table of General Li Jiedu and I. As a senior vice division level officer of the new 17th Division, or to be more precise, as the future division commander of the new 17th Division that the federal military had carefully nurtured, Su Lu could no longer maintain his calm when he suddenly heard this news. He stood up abruptly, his lips trembling slightly. He wanted to ask something, but in the end, he didn't ask. Commander Yu Chenghai, who was born a chef, looked like a harmless old man, but in reality, he was the last representative of the entire generation of outstanding soldiers under war god Li Pifu. In the war against the Empire, he led the new 17th Division to silently obtain victory after victory, restoring the unparalleled glory of the undefeated division of the past. But now, for some unknown reason, he was forced to leave his combat post. A few days ago, General Li Jiedu made a special trip to the headquarters of the new 17th Division to meet with Commander Yu. As for what they talked about, no one knows. Minister Zhou reminded. Su Lu slowly lowered his head, a bitter and self-deprecating smile on his face. As the only son of war god Li Pifu, senior military figures like General Myers and Commander Yu Chenghai of the previous generation, even if they didn't agree with Li Jiedu's way of thinking, when faced with intense conflict, they would always remember whose descendant he was. Then, making the choice to remain silent and give in would not be surprising or shocking. At this moment, Su Lu very naturally thought of the time he spent in the hot springs with the old man in Philadelphia, thought of the flashing lights in front of the manor, and even thought of Li Jiedu's gentle smile at the time. The successor of the war god? At the time, the entire Federation seemed to think that he was the chosen successor of the war god, but if Li Jiedu stood out, who would still think so? This was a very ironic and sad truth. Even if it was the Federation's war god Li Pifu, once he left this world, there was no way for him to decide who his successor would be. Minister Zhou looked at him and continued, "Commander, you resigned, you were hunted down. It seems that in order to control the troops, some people have lost their rationality and become incomparably crazy." Su Lu raised his head and suddenly asked seriously, "Have you ever imagined that General Li Jiedu could be the leader of the radical faction?" "No." Minister Zhou was silent for a moment before replying. "I always thought that he was a gentle and respectable military theorist. It was very difficult for me to associate those conspiracies and murders with him. I also never thought of this possibility, but I didn't expect that the most impossible thing would become true," Su Lu replied in a low voice. "Do you want to meet with Li Jiedu?" Minister Zhou asked with his brows slightly furrowed. "No. There is no meaning in meeting now." Su Lu shook his head and continued, "As you said just now, he and those people have already lost their rationality and have fallen into some kind of hysterical madness. In my opinion, this kind of madness means that they have already begun to be afraid and have begun to panic." After a moment of consideration, he continued, "I plan to hold a press conference. The time was originally set for tomorrow, but I want to bring it forward to today. Go be careful. Please be sure to be careful of your own safety. Killing you is because you have the ability to threaten their safety," Minister Zhou replied with a smile. "I don't seem to have this ability, so I am safer than you." Su Lu hesitated for a moment and asked, "They forced you to resign, how are you going to deal with it? Do you want to discuss it with Lady Tai?" The lady and those families can deeply influence the political structure of the Federation, but their influence on the military is extremely limited. After all, the military's true strength is a matter of the Constitution, and it is basically under the guidance of the war god. Minister Zhou said with emotion, "So only the Lees of Philadelphia can influence the military. Of course, the Zhong family of the West Woods should also have this ability, but unfortunately, those families didn't stop or even tacitly allowed that tragedy to unfold." "But I won't resign," Minister Zhou said calmly. "While some people are busy fighting for or consolidating their power to realize their ambitions or ideals, someone has to remember that on the front lines, in the distant Empire Star region, there are hundreds of thousands of Federation soldiers fighting a bloody battle. They need supplies, ammo, and mechas. They don't care who wins in the Capital Ring's vanity contest, and this is my responsibility as the Minister of Defense." He looked at the young Federation officer and said with a smile, "So I won't resign. I will be like a young man who has fallen in love for the first time, shamelessly cling to the position of Minister of Defense, and strive to do something for the front lines." Su Lu saluted the only federal military general who truly had the demeanor of a scholar behind the table. "Colonel Su Lu." Colonel Su Lu. Under the vigilant protection of the members of Iron Division, Su Lu walked out of the elevator and prepared to pass through the spacious hall on the first floor of the Department of Defense. The officers he met on the way looked at him in surprise and saluted and greeted him with joy or nervousness. They didn't know why he suddenly appeared in the Capital Special District when he was supposed to be carrying out a mission in the West Woods. Almost at the same time, there was a burst of dense and excited salutes and footsteps from the gorgeous revolving door of the Department of Defense building. "Commander Shaoqing. Commander Shaoqing, hello." Surrounded by the officers of the Iron 7th Division, Du Shaoqing, wearing a straight lieutenant general's uniform, walked in through the door. The officers of the Department of Defense, who were busy carrying documents, hurriedly stood at attention and saluted in surprise. They didn't know what Du Shaoqing and the officers of the Iron 7th Division were carrying out, or were they having a meeting. But in short, just as Su Lu was about to leave, he appeared in the Department of Defense building. When he saw Su Lu also noticed his appearance. A faint light seemed to flash in their eyes, but neither of them took the initiative to stop. On the contrary, their footsteps were exceptionally firm and steady, without a trace of slowing down. They didn't stop, and the officers beside them naturally wouldn't stop either. Both of them had a cold and cool demeanor, looking straight ahead, facing each other, but not in each other's eyes. Seeing this sudden scene, thinking of the many rumors in the federal forces over the years, thinking of Du Shaoqing and Su Li's various military exercises from their graduation day until recently, the originally noisy Department of Defense building suddenly quieted down, and the empty hall seemed even more spacious. Only the crisp sound of military boots on both sides could be heard, getting closer and closer. Right in the center of the Department of Defense building was a huge military emblem of the Federation. It was made of heavy carbon alloy bullet shells laid into the hard ground, and under the light, it shone with a cold light like a sword. When Su Lu and Du Shaoqing walked past the military emblem of the Federation, they stopped at almost the same time. "Commander Shaoqing." "Colonel Su Lu." Su Lu saluted, and Du Shaoqing returned the salute. There was a moment of silence. Su Lu stared at the sunglasses on the bridge of his nose and said, "I just heard a sentence, and I want to pass it on to you. The army shouldn't have its own thoughts because it's too dangerous." Du Shaoqing's expression was cold, and his hands were behind his back. He stood straight like the last surviving winter pine in the glacier. He slowly took off his sunglasses, looked at Su Lu expressionlessly, and replied, "Do you think I need you to tell me the concept proposed in Schiller's political drama?" Su Lu looked at his eyes and his hair that was obviously whiter than it was a few months ago, and said, "History will remember many things. I just want to remind you that no matter when, you and your troops must at least remember one thing. The duty of a soldier is to obey orders. According to the Charter, they must completely obey the orders of the elected government of the Federation." Hearing this, Du Shaoqing's cold expression suddenly had a strange change. The corners of his lips curled up as if he wanted to smile, but in the end it only turned into a trace of coldness. "Colonel Su Lu, you know your position. I don't need you to nag like a woman. I also know what the duty of a soldier is." In the building of the Ministry of National Defense, two groups of officers stood behind the two of them, facing each other. Although it was impossible for them to point their guns at each other, they could clearly feel that the air was filled with the smell of stone after a high-speed collision, as if the stone could be crushed into powder at any time. The current situation was gradually becoming clear. Du Shaoqing and his Iron 7th Division were one of the strongest supporters of the radical faction in the military. Su Lu hoped that he could use words to make the enemy surrender, but at this moment, he really had a lot to say to Du Shaoqing. "I heard that Shimen died?" He looked at Du Shaoqing and the officers of the Iron 7th Division with a serious expression. Then he slowly narrowed his eyes and smiled. "It's good that he died." Chapter 745. "Colonel Su Lu, you have to take back what you just said," an officer of the Iron 7th Division said. "And apologize for it." No. Su Lu simply refused this suggestion. He still looked into Du Shaoqing's eyes and said, "You should know very well why Shimen died. In fact, he should have died 5 years ago. What I don't know now is how much you know about what happened 5 years ago, Commander Shaoqing." In the latter half of the 37th Constitution, no one in the federal military dared to use such a forceful tone to question Du Shaoqing face to face, not even those big shot. During the graduation day military drill at the training base, although Su Lu successfully prevented Du Shaoqing from flipping out, he still had to play the role of a junior officer in front of Du Shaoqing. He would never act as tough and equal as he did today in the empty hall. Although Du Shaoqing was now a lieutenant general and he was only a colonel, there was a strict and insurmountable gap between the two of them. But for some reason, ever since the West Woods Sunset State Army returned after defying orders, it was difficult to find the influence of this difference in class in Su Li's attitude. Du Shaoqing had been silently, or rather, indifferently looking at Su Lu. His right index finger gently slid along the edge of his sunglasses. No one knew what he was thinking. After a moment of silence, Su Lu suddenly asked in a low voice, "Commander Shaoqing, if I remember correctly, you should also be a member of that so-called Trinity Association. I'm very curious, what exactly did you learn in that association? How to shoot your comrades in the back?" In literary works, the word suffocating was often used to describe tense confrontations. When it was used too many times, it often made people feel that it was a little old-fashioned. But today in the empty hall, the Department of Defense officers who saw this confrontation scene vaguely understood the reason for this description. Under the bright lights, the two groups of officers stood facing each other. They looked at each other in silence and did not speak loudly. The invisible collision and friction that gradually heated up seemed to have exhausted the oxygen in the surrounding environment and began to make it difficult for people to breathe. Standing in front of the elevator, standing in the corridor, and standing next to the plants, the officers had long forgotten their work. They nervously stared at the center of the hall. No one spoke. They even collectively subconsciously lowered the sound of their breathing, waiting for Commander Du Shaoqing to open his mouth to respond. With his usual arrogance and indifference, he would suppress the other party's momentum or intensify the current situation. At this moment, the elevator door opened with an untimely beep. A female civilian officer's documents scattered all over the floor. The officers in the building subconsciously looked over, and then cast their eyes back to the place they needed to pay attention to. Du Shaoqing still didn't say anything. Instead, it was Lu Sifu, the deputy commander of the Iron 7th Division, who was standing to his left, who provoked Su Lu in a cold voice. "I heard that Shi Qinghai is dead?" Su Li's pair of knife-like thick eyebrows slightly trembled. "It's good that he died," Lu Sifu added expressionlessly. Su Li's straight eyebrows finally raised. As if venting his anger, he waved his right arm and forcefully chopped down in the air, as if he wanted to break all the difficulties and obstacles in front of him into pieces of scrap metal. His extremely explosive reply resounded throughout the entire building of the Ministry of Defense. "It's a glorious death." These 4 words were like 4 hard stones that smashed onto the smooth floor of the hall. They smashed onto the insignia of the Federation that couldn't be spoken. They were suffused with a metallic luster and filled with a murderous aura. A dull sound echoed in the hall. Du Shaoqing slightly lowered his eyes and looked at the insignia of the Federation at his feet. He seemed to be feeling Su Li's emotions at this moment. In the end, he still didn't say a word. He didn't reveal a trace of emotion. He slowly raised his right hand and put on his sunglasses again. They brushed past each other. There are very few. No, there has never been such a strange situation in this world. Even when my father returned to the capital ring from the Empire all those years ago and was faced with great pressure from Parliament Hill, he never displayed such strong confidence. A convoy of bulletproof military vehicles sped along the quiet roads of the capital's suburbs. Behind the trees in the fields beside the roads, the black silhouettes of several MX mechas could be faintly seen. They were silently following and protecting the convoy in a marching posture. There were very few people in the capital ring who could enjoy the privilege of being protected by military mechas. The present chairman of the Joint Staff Conference and commander of the 1st Military Region of the Federation, General Li Jiedu, in a real sense, the number 1 person in the military, undoubtedly had this right. However, this wasn't the front lines. This was the capital special district that was countless light years away from the flames of war, a special district that hadn't experienced any turbulence in thousands of years. For him to actually need the protection of MX mechas when he was traveling, it could be seen that this military leader's current mood was indeed, as he had said before. He was filled with some sort of absurd and strange sense of alarm. It is indeed very strange. Deliberately cut off from contact with the 17th Division. Now, he is just a mere colonel without any troops. Yet, it is precisely this kind of person who dares to walk so openly in this city with those 20 or so loyal subordinates of his. Moreover, we have no way of killing him. General Lee Jae-do gazed at the flourishing late spring scenery outside the car window and said with a gentle smile, "These young soldiers are like trees that grow freely in the spring. Neither the wildfire nor the spring rain seems to be able to stop their powerful footstep. On the contrary, it only helps them become even stronger." Of the 17 sniping points arranged, they have successfully evaded 15 of them. 2 of the sniping points have been destroyed. Sitting at the front of the car, the director of the 1st Military Region's Special Operations Room could not understand how those targets had managed to avoid these ambushes. He also could not understand why the general could still maintain such a gentle and calm state of mind in the face of such a strange situation. I have never hoped that we could use snipers to eliminate the successor personally chosen by Father. These are just some small tricks that are similar to using a tree branch to poke a bull. Through these small tricks we can clearly see just how far he can go. Then, when we eliminate him, we can make targeted arrangements. Lee Jae-do gazed outside the car window. His expression was calm, and no one could see the danger contained in his words at this moment. Su-lu should already know that I know where his strength comes from. Then, he will think that we will be afraid, will panic, will become crazy, and thus lose without a fight. Those useless bullets will most likely help him think that we have already panicked, that we have already gone crazy. He will relax, and his confidence will become an arrogance that even he himself does not realize. This is very good. Even now, there are still many people who have fantasies about him. They think that they can persuade him, or use as peaceful a method as possible to eliminate him. I am very glad that Su-lu is strong enough and confident enough. Then, step by step, he will push himself into an irreversible death zone. General, don't worry, we have arrived at the back of the mountain. The Tai family, whose enormous body was hidden in the shadows of history, was probably the recognized spiritual leader of the 7 major families. The Lees of Philadelphia, on the other hand, suddenly jumped onto the stage of the 37th constitutional era, dazzling and insufferably arrogant. These 2 families, who were supposed to be enemies, had actually always been in close contact with each other. If it was not because the Lees of Philadelphia had just started their inheritance, perhaps this kind of contact could already be called a family friend. Lady Tai of the back of the mountain and the recently deceased military god Li Pifu had always maintained a very close personal friendship because of those historical stories and memories of that traitor. This kind of friendship had lasted for many years. Perhaps it had never displayed its power under the sun, but in reality, it had played a very important role in ensuring the stability and rapid development of the Federation. If the glory of the Lees of Philadelphia began to be passed down, the back of the mountain formally prepared a purely private lunch. However, on the terrace facing the lake, the conversation between Lady Tai and General Lee Jae-do did not seem to go as smoothly as imagined. The half-hanging late spring plants on the edge of the terrace turned their heads rustling, unwilling to waste time to distinguish how many invisible bullets were hidden in the seemingly ordinary conversation between these 2 important figures. "Madam, as you said, the political situation of the Federation is indeed in dire need of stability right now, especially after the Parliament Hill incident. The public's mood is very chaotic." Lee Jae-do gently placed the silver spoon on the Guna porcelain plate. After a moment of silence, he gently continued, "But the problem right now is that if Colonel Sulu is allowed to continue investigating that case, not only will Vice President Byron's soul be disturbed after his death, you and those families will also be in a very difficult situation. The political situation will be shaken because of this, and most importantly, the public may lose their confidence in the government because of this. With your wisdom, you should be very clear about the dangers contained within this." Lady Tai held the teacup and silently looked at the lush green hills on the opposite side of the terrace. There was a sense of tranquility and strength in her extremely ordinary appearance. Sulu has the first order authority of the Bureau of Proclamation, and this authority is helping him in some incomprehensible way. Lee Jae-do continued calmly, "The Bureau of Proclamation has not yet found a way to deal with this authority. If you are not willing to help, this matter may really become difficult to control. Actually I am not that much older than you, and now that your father has passed away, there is no need for you to still use honorifics with me. As for the issue of Su Lee's authority, the old man should have some idea of it, but since he didn't tell me before his death, I naturally won't do anything." Lady Tai turned her head and looked at Lee Jae-do. She slowly said, "You have kept a low profile for 20 years, but your father's old comrades and old friends like me have never underestimated your shrewdness and ability. I simply do not believe that you will begin your plan before you find a way to control Su Lo." After a moment of silence, Lee Jae-do looked at the woman in front of him and said, "Madam, I know very well that you need to keep Su Lu alive, and to keep people like us in the military alive as the successor of the god of war, but the problem is you know very well that Su Lu has never sat on a forklift board." Never sat on a forklift board. This was a very accurate description of Su Lee's personality. Lady Tai's lips curved up in a trace of a smile. Lee Jae-do looked at her and continued, "I believe that right now, you are very curious as to what he is saying at the press conference that is being held right now." Chapter 746. To hold a press conference at this time, it doesn't matter what he says. The important thing is that he shouldn't have said it in the first place. Lee Jae-do picked up the black curly leaf tea in front of him and took a sip. A moment later, he continued to speak gently. "This proves once again that he, who has never sat on a seesaw, can never become the person who can balance the situation like you expect, no matter how good his foundation is, no matter how much my father and you favor him at the same time." He raised his head and looked at Lady Tai, saying calmly, "On the contrary, he will make the Federation's situation more dangerous and complicated. Unfortunately, he has this ability." "No." Lady Tai smiled and replied, "According to my observation, that small-eyed boy is now more mature, or rather, more vulgar. For you, for me, and for the Federation, this is an extremely good change." Speaking up to this point, the madam quietly looked into Lee Jae-do's eyes and said with a trace of extremely light, almost to the point where it couldn't be smelled, "Otherwise, according to his style of stubbornly resisting my pressure to kill Macklin, even if you have more than 10 mechas by your side now, he would still be foolish enough to carry a few guns and run all over the Federation to kill you." These words were extremely continuous and destructive. Lee Jae-do was slightly stunned, and his face revealed a slightly bitter smile of self-mockery. As the current #1 person in the federal military, he was intimidated by a colonel to the point where he had to carry a mecha whenever he went out. He really didn't have much dignity to speak of. From that year, when Sulu broke into the Oak State Tree Peace Foundation building, I no longer had any substantial influence over him. Therefore, regarding his problem, I think we don't need to discuss it anymore. Lady Tai's right arm lightly rested on the railing at the edge of the balcony. She usually liked to cook simple dishes, so her fingers weren't as smooth as those of other noble ladies. In the spring breeze, she slightly opened her hand, as if she wanted to grab onto something, but also as if she just wanted to feel that comfortable feeling. She gently looked at Li Jiedu, but there was an unquestionable seriousness. What I want to know now is, after successfully weakening the Zhong family, how exactly do you plan to continue down this path? If it wasn't for Su Lu informing me, perhaps I would still be in the dark. The madam laughed self-deprecatingly, shook her head, and sighed. I just said that we never underestimated your ability, but now it seems that you were able to hide in the shadows under your father's halo for so many years, patiently making such careful preparations. The so-called not underestimating is also a kind of underestimating, because for someone as strong as you, no one in the Federation is qualified to judge you. Madam, you flatter me. These people only want to do something for the Federation, Li Jiedu replied gently. As for the worries of you and those families, there is actually no need to worry. You asked me where we will go. I can't give you a definite answer right now, because once the Federation stabilizes, the most important problem to consider is the front lines. Then, we can only take one step at a time. But rest assured, we will never touch an untouchable situation. Is this a promise? Lady Tai's eyes narrowed slightly, her gaze suddenly becoming extremely sharp. This question was extremely simple, but it definitely wasn't simple. This meant that the radical forces of the federal military would take a stance towards the 7 families in the Federation's political situation in the future. And this stance would, without a doubt, directly affect the Federation in the years to come. However, when faced with this question that carried countless implications, General Li Jiedu's answer was actually that calm and concise. Of course. The people left the terrace and the scenery of late spring was thick. Lady Tai narrowed her eyes slightly, gazing at the lake and mountains in her embrace. Suddenly, she released an almost inaudible sigh, lightly asking in self-mockery, "Do you believe in his promises?" When soldiers become politicians, their promises don't have any meaning. Shunli quietly stood behind Lady Tai, playing a role that hadn't changed for several years. Lady Tai's brows slightly furrowed, her voice slightly cold as she said, "I like a more direct answer, not this type of dramatic tone thing." Secretary Shun keenly sensed that Lady Tai's mood was a bit bad, so he obediently nodded in agreement. "The situation won't change?" Lady Tai expressionlessly shook her head, stood up, and leaned against the railing, leaving no trace on her face. If they didn't want to create a situation that hasn't changed for thousands of years, why would these soldiers be so excited to throw themselves into the dark side of politics that they hated the most in the past? Once the steel monsters have their own consciousness, their appetite will become extremely greedy. Any former overlord is nothing more than a few pieces of delicious synthetic meat in their eyes. Lady Tai turned around to look at Butler Jean, who had appeared out of nowhere, indifferently saying, "Make some preparations. If nothing unexpected happens, this long-term struggle may last for many years." "Yes." Butler Jean and Secretary Shen bowed at the same time. Lady Tai didn't say anything else. Her simple order was passed down to the huge invisible empire through the hands of these 2 people in charge of the Tai family, and it would immediately start changing the direction of many things. In order to face the unprecedented challenge that might come, these families that had lived, grown, or rotted together with the Federation for thousands of years had to make some preparations. She lightly touched the railing of the balcony, looking at the picturesque landscape in silence. She really didn't understand where the militants' confidence came from. Just one sure Qinghai was enough to put them in a terrible situation, and their partners in the government were all purged and killed. Could it be because of the few troops that Li Jiedu controlled? At the end of the day, Payable was an elected president who was highly popular with the people. He had the innate loyalty of the federal army. Most importantly, outside the official residence, there was still that Su Lu who seemed to never die. Who would obtain the final victory? What did Su Lu say at the press conference? Lady Tai suddenly remembered this matter. For the Federation's press, Su Lu was without a doubt extremely newsworthy. Whether it was the National Girl scandal that caused a lot of commotion years ago, or the countless heroic deeds that later shocked the Federation, they all proved this point. But for the Federation's press, Su Lu was without a doubt the most unpopular person to interview among all the famous people in the Federation. This young colonel, perhaps inherited the style of Philadelphia's army god, had never accepted an interview in the past few years, except for the press conferences that were arranged by the President's official residence and the Ministry of Defense. So when the major media received the news that he was going to hold a press conference, they were all very surprised. Although the time of the press conference was changed again and again, the media had no complaint. With excitement and nervousness, they waited for the Federation's hero, who was qualified to become a news event, to appear. A very small number of reporters who had the most sensitive sense of smell or the most powerful intelligence source vaguely guessed that this press conference might be related to the terrorist attack that shocked the entire universe a dozen days ago on Parliament Hill. The funeral of the Federation's vice president, Mr. Byron, and the 2 senators had just finished, and the entire Federation was still in mourning. What exactly did Colonel Su Lu want to do? Or rather, what did he want to say? With this sharp question in mind, when Su Lu, wearing sunglasses, walked into the conference room of the George Carlin Cultural and Arts Center under the flashing lights after the press conference began, reporter Wood from the Capital Special District Daily asked without hesitation and without paying attention to Gu Shifeng, who was acting as the host on the podium. He shouted loudly, "Colonel Su Lu. According to my sources, the body of Shi Qinghai, the suspect of the terrorist attack on Parliament Hill, was forcefully taken out of the police station building by you and your team members last night. May I ask if you have any explanation for this accusation? Or should I say, do you want to confirm it?" Even if he was a Federation war hero, forcibly taking away the body of a terrorist attack suspect on a day when the people of the Federation were collectively mourning would not be forgiven or understood by anyone. As soon as the press conference began, a reporter asked such a sharp question, which instantly made the venue, which had just quieted down a little, noisy. The whispers were filled with the exclamations of the reporters who did not know what had happened last night. On the podium, Su Lu took off the wide sunglasses on his nose bridge, revealing a pair of small but exceptionally sincere eyes. He glanced at the reporters in front of him, and was somewhat surprised to find that the one who asked such a sharp question was actually Wood from the Capital Special District Daily. The camera in the photographer's hand continued to flash, and the high-definition camera had already started working. In the camera, Su Lu lowered his head and thought for a very short period of time, then he held the edge of the table and raised his head. He looked at the reporters and answered very simply, "Yes, I took his body out of the police station building last night. I can confirm this with all of you. Also, I can tell you that he has been buried in a good place." The reporters immediately fell into another wave of restlessness. They really did not expect that Su Lu would actually directly admit that he was related to the terrorist attack suspect. These reporters, who were more or less emotionally inclined towards Su Lu, looked at the podium with worry and puzzlement. They thought to themselves, "Don't you understand that doing so is tantamount to challenging the psychological bottom line of the people of the Federation?" No matter how worried and puzzled they were, the reporters still had to follow the requirements of their profession and use the fastest speed to compile a concise news article and publish it to their respective newspapers or television stations. Then, a reporter from the Three Linlin Forum Daily seized the opportunity and asked first, "Why? You should know very well that this is already a violation of the Federation's laws." It was a very simple 3 words, but it was the answer that all the reporters, and perhaps all the people of the Federation who were about to be filled with indignation and grief, wanted to know. Why would a hero of the Federation disobey military orders and return from the West Woods? It was all to bury a terrorist who had committed heinous crimes. Leave the legal issues to the lawyers, and I will answer my own questions. Why did I do this? Sulu narrowed his eyes and spaced out for a while, then answered very seriously, "Because in my heart the guy who rushed into Parliament Hill is not a terrorist, and definitely not some messy thing like a spy of the Empire. His name is Shi Qinghai, and he is my best friend. He is the guy that the Federation needs to thank the most." Chapter 747. In the southern suburbs of the capital, in the George Carlin Foundation Art Center, on the enormous hologram outside the building was a high-definition rotating shot of the environment. The peach blossoms within reach were in full bloom in the spring breeze. The conference room inside the building was completely silent. The slightly cool breeze from the air exchange system seemed to want to freeze everything in the room. The reporters were either lowering their heads, biting the end of their pens, frowning, or opening their mouths slightly, listening to Su Li's calm and simple narration on the stage. This was the story of a spy from Green Dragon Mountain. That spy was called Shi Qinghai. When he was young, his family suffered a calamity because of a certain large enterprise of the Federation. He used his excellent grades to enter the Capital University-affiliated high school, and then entered the first military academy to further his studies. After graduation, he was assigned to the 4th section of the Federation Investigation Bureau's Linhai branch. His future was bright. However, no one knew that as early as in school, he had already been absorbed by the intelligence system of Green Dragon Mountain's anti-government army. He became a fish in that famous deep sea that no one had ever seen. For all the people of the Federation, Shi Qinghai is just a very unfamiliar name. He is just an unremarkable stranger. So when the Green Dragon Mountain Committee recognized his identity and produced evidence that he had already been fired, you would very naturally believe that he is a fallen spy with no future. So you can very easily believe the results of the Federation government's investigation. He broke into Parliament Mountain and didn't hesitate to use his life to kill Vice President Byron and the members of Parliament. He is just a deranged crazy terrorist who was bought over by some power that hasn't found a scapegoat yet. But I know him. He is handsome, confident, and gentle. His grades are so good that he can enter the Trinity Association. His pair of peach blossom eyes can charm all women. Although it sounds like I am looking for a wife for him, it is the truth. As long as he is willing, he can easily obtain wealth and status that ordinary people can't imagine. Mr. Pabre took a military transport plane and landed in Green Dragon Mountain. He completed the Great Reconciliation Agreement that surprised everyone. He was the one who completed the contact arrangement. 4 years ago, Macklin died in the building of the Huanshan Four States Foundation. He and I did it together. I believe that the WikiLeaks video released in the past year is enough for you to digest the shock brought by this news. You can also roughly understand that he once helped the Federation solve its biggest problem. Mr. President pardoned him without anyone knowing. He served as the liaison officer between the Special Forces and the Department of Defense. In the distant West Woods occupied planet, he hid in the deep snow alone, wielding the big gun that rang out in front of Parliament Hill. God knows how many Imperial officers he killed. This is the George Carlin Foundation Art Center. 2 years ago, the documentary called Team 7 won all the awards here. My teammates and I were pushed onto the stage by your cheers, and we enjoyed the courtesy of the entire Federation. In fact, Shi Qinghai once fought side by side with us, and he was also qualified to stand under the spotlight, but he chose to walk into the shadows behind the lights again. There was a long silence in the conference room. It was not that the reporters did not have any questions they wanted to ask, but they could clearly tell from Su Li's expression that he had more to say. Su Li rubbed his eyebrows and said, "As I said just now, he is my best friend. So when Mr. President authorized me to investigate the attack on the ancient bell, He, who had no obligation to take the risk to help me, once again walked into the darkness and began to pursue the clues that were about to be forgotten by people. After a short pause, he looked at the reporters who were taking notes and said seriously, "He is used to walking in the darkness, but he is more dazzling than anyone else. A person like this can't be a terrorist. I hope the people of the Federation can understand this. He has a definite reason for everything he does, and only those reasons can make him do so many things that you think are inconceivable." At this point, a reporter finally could not suppress his emotions and raised his hand to ask, "Including the attack on Parliament Hill?" "Yes," Sulu replied. The reporters easily deduced a shocking conclusion from these words. Someone asked in a loud voice, "Colonel Sulu, do you think that Vice President Byron and those councillors are related to the attack on the ancient bell by the Imperial fleet?" "I didn't say that. In fact, Shi Qinghai and I have been investigating this matter." Sulu raised his head and looked at the reporter who asked the question in the corner. "That's ridiculous. It's ridiculous." The reporters were shocked and couldn't accept Sulu's words. Although the Federation had investigated the attack on the ancient bell a few months ago and seemed to have found some new suspicious points, it was really hard to imagine that the Vice President of the Federation was involved in this matter. The last investigation had to be terminated for reasons that everyone knows. Sulu looked at the reporters and said, "At that time, Shi Qinghai and I already had some evidence, but unfortunately, we didn't have the chance to continue the investigation. According to the sources of the Department of Defense, you didn't get permission to leave the West Woods, which is a serious violation of military regulations." Reporter Wood, who had been silent for a while, held an electronic ink pen between his fingers and asked thoughtfully, "What's the purpose of insisting on returning to the capital ring, even at the risk of being punished by military law? Are you trying to clear your friend's name? Or do you want to continue the investigation that was interrupted last time?" "I will ask for a second authorization from Mr. President to restart the investigation on the ancient bell," Sulu replied. "If there are any new findings or evidence, I will inform all of you immediately within the scope of the Charter." The reporters frowned and shook their heads subconsciously. They were not satisfied with or did not agree with Sulu's vision of the future situation. "If that's the case, why did you hold this press conference before getting a second authorization from Mr. President? What's your purpose for holding this press conference alone?" Reporter Wood keenly saw the problem and continued to ask, "I want to officially inform some people." Sulu narrowed his eyes and looked at the nearest camera, as if he was looking at the big shots in the Federation's political and military circles behind the camera. After a short pause, he said seriously, "I'm back, and I'm going to restart the investigation. Are you ready?" After the press conference ended, it was almost dusk. The second day of Sulu's return to the capital ring passed quickly and nervously. The shadows of the buildings and the red clouds mixed into a large colorful mixture, and the originally pink peach blossoms suddenly became bright red. The reporters left the George Carlin Foundation Art Center in twos and threes, but no one was in a hurry to return to the newspaper office or the TV station. Instead, they chose to call their acquaintances to the nearby tavern for a few drinks. They heard the extremely explosive news at the press conference, but there was no way to share it with anyone. They had to immediately express the countless questions in their hearts and express the shock in their minds with their colleague. Without Sulu's clear evidence, no matter how much the media worshipped the freedom of the press, it was impossible to publish the news that the Vice President of the Federation was suspected of colluding with the Imperial fleet. This had nothing to do with the pressure of the press director in the President's residence. The integrity of the journalists required them to have evidence, and the atmosphere in which the entire Federation was mourning for Vice President Byron was an invisible ruler. Sulu did not leave the art center. The members of Group 7 were scattered around the building, controlling all the dangerous sniping points and guarding his safety outside the window in the red twilight. In the meantime, He was talking to reporter Wood in a low voice in the room. "Why did you ask me to stay alone?" Wood asked in confusion. "Because I trust you. However, I thought that Chief Editor Bob would come with you," Sulu explained with a smile. "It seems that my news popularity is still not enough to attract Chief Editor to come personally." Wood shrugged and said with slight ridicule, "In the past 2 years, you have rejected 3 of my interview requests, and now you say that you trust me. Please don't tell me that this is because we did the last interview with the war god." Sulu shook his head. After a moment of silence, he said, "Do you remember what I just said about Macklin? At that time, in the entire Federation's press circle, only the Capital Special District Daily News dared to question that old man and even investigate him. If that friend of yours, Shi Qinghai, was really involved in the assassination of Macklin, I will prudently express my trust in him. However, this trust is not much, because in my opinion, his cold-blooded performance on Parliament Hill is not what you would call an idealist." Wood lit a cigarette and took 2 puffs. In the pungent smoke that filled the air, he said with a hint of pride, "Speaking of the Macklin case, I led a group of paparazzi to S2 and investigated it for dozens of days. It should be considered the proudest thing in my life." Sulu looked at the red flower that was reflected in the window glass at his feet and suddenly said, "Before you went to investigate, you should have received an electronic document about the investigation of Macklin." Wood frowned slightly. He held the cigarette between his fingers. He did not understand how the other party knew about this. In fact, until today, he still did not know who sent the documents to the newspaper. "Those were all found by Shi Qinghai." Sulu smiled at the shocked reporter Wood. He took out a microchip from the pocket of his military jacket and handed it over. "Just now at the press conference, I said that we did not find any evidence. In fact, I was lying. This microchip hides the evidence of Vice President Byron and those few senators involved in the case. I am giving this evidence to you because I trust you and Chief Editor Bob. And I trust you because although Shi Qinghai and I have not fought side by side with you, we have indeed fought together." Wood was silent for a moment. He slowly and carefully put out the cigarette by his feet. After taking 2 deep breaths, he took the microchip with a serious expression and said, "What should we do? This plot is very important recently. It is very difficult to write. I don't want to write too poorly. Such a simple request is almost killing me. My ability is limited. Tomorrow I will write less or I will stop for a day. I have to sort out this most troublesome and most important plot and find a good place to eat on the big cake." Chapter 748. You and Chief Editor Bob are professionals. You should be able to find the most suitable time to publish these things, but not now. The official residence should be under tremendous pressure right now. What we need to do is to cooperate with Mr. President's pace and rhythm." Sulu said, "The incident on Parliament Hill just happened. The public is very agitated. There are still hundreds of thousands of Federation soldiers on the front lines of the Imperium. The capital ring can't fall into chaos. As far as I know, other than attending Vice President Byron's funeral, Mr. Prabble has not appeared in public for more than 10 days, citing the need to increase the security level." Wood took a puff of his cigarette and reminded him with a slightly hoarse voice, "This situation is not common. If the President really has a plan to deal with this matter, how do you and I know? How can we cooperate? To solve this matter, and to solve it as safely as possible, we must go through the judicial route." Sulu also lit a cigarette and continued, "Mr. President is safe right now. However, some people have quietly built a wall within the government and even within the official residence. We should be able to find a reason to overthrow this wall by gradually applying pressure from the outside." He was about to say something else, but the burning smell and smoke from the front of the number 37 brand cigarettes lingered in front of his eyes. It was a bit of a hindrance. He suddenly realized that it was more like he was talking to himself. There was no need to say too much. Just like before, doing things was always more important than talking. When reporter Wood left the George Carlin Foundation Art Center, dusk had not yet completely faded. The peach blossoms by the street were smiling in the rich spring breeze and the golden warmth. Sulu felt that it was somewhat dazzling. When he was about to put on his sunglasses, he saw a girl that he had never expected to see appear in front of him. Therefore, the wide sunglasses froze in front of his chin in a somewhat comical manner. She was wearing an inconspicuous light gray sports windbreaker, just like the one she wore when she left the spaceport and headed to Cillian's concert amidst the cheers of countless soldiers. The hood of the windbreaker covered her head and face completely, covering her beautiful hair that had long turned from purple to black and from short to long. The occasional glimpse of her exquisite eyes under the hood's shadow was still enough to amaze everyone. After the grand funeral and the completion of the statue of Li Pifu, Jian Shuer did not return to the Federal Fleet. Instead, she returned to Philadelphia and spent some peaceful time with the old man in the grave. During this period of time, Su Lu, who was far away in the West Woods, kept a correspondence with her. However, because of so many things that happened one after another, the love that had just become hot on the desolate planet of the Empire unfortunately did not have the chance to burn into an intoxicating flame. I always thought that men and women in love should communicate more passionately with each other. Jian Shuer walked in front of him, gently held his arm, and said with a smile, and should not deliberately keep too far away from each other. The members of Group 7 scattered around the stone steps of the art center, as well as the members responsible for sniping and security missions further away, looked at the slender hand that passed through Su Li's arm through their own eyes or long-range binoculars. They could not help but sigh softly in their hearts at the same time. They could not help but feel envious and jealous. Su Lu smiled bitterly and said, "It's been a bit troublesome recently. Although our relationship has indeed developed a bit too lightly, and we have not even met much." Jian Shuer shrugged cutely, hugged his hand tighter, and said, "But if I were your girlfriend, the more troublesome things are, the more you should tell me. This is indeed my problem." Su Lu said with some shame, "It's probably because I have never been in a serious relationship before, so I didn't consider it thoroughly. I forgive you." Jian Shuer raised her head slightly, her beautiful chin carrying a trace of mockery, her watery eyes reflecting the sunset. Then the two began to walk along the streets of the southern part of the capital. Within a range of 200 meters, on top of a tall building even further away, 20-some members of Group 7 vigilantly guarded the surroundings. The setting sun pulled their shadows very long, very long. The slow and seemingly extremely casual walk did not seem to require any destination. The love between the hero of the Federation and the nation's maiden should have been the most beautiful event in this constitutional calendar. However, in this turbulent era, countless passionate and ugly events happened one after another, leaving no time for people to watch or even catch their breath. There was actually no chance for a beautiful release. Speaking of which, this was actually the first time that Su Lu and Jian Shuer walked like real lovers. It was just that this seemingly peaceful and beautiful love scene had no choice but to wrap around the members of Group 7 and slowly roll around like a snowball. It made people speechless. Moreover, in this extremely rare and precious stroll, the young man and woman's conversation still couldn't help but be extremely unharmonious with the scenery of late spring. In particular, Jian Shuer was extremely clear about the relationship between him and the man from Green Dragon Mountain who had charged into Parliament Mountain. The nation's maiden beside him had already grown up. She still carried a beauty that could topple the entire Federation, adding a bit of gradually maturing brilliance. Su Lu knew better than anyone what kind of clear ideals and perseverance Jian Shuer possessed under her moving appearance. After all, she was the daughter of the #1 traitor of the Federation and the Empress of the Empire. She had inherited the most inconceivable rebellious and daring traits of her parents. However, when he said that Li Jiedu was the behind-the-scenes leader of the radical faction in the military, he still found it somewhat hard to imagine that Jian Shuer didn't show any shock in her eyes. I've always known that this cousin of mine, Li Jiedu, is a very extraordinary person. Over the years, even the most perceptive people in the Federation have only noticed his low profile. They have never thought that behind that low profile is a meticulous thinking and truly powerful self-confidence. Jian Shuer leaned on his shoulder and said softly, "For such an extraordinary person to use such a long time to plan something, then the height he intends to reach must be extremely frightening. If you insist on standing on the opposite side of him, then I only have one piece of advice for you. When facing him, you can't be too cautious. Don't worry too much. These days, I've been working hard to learn how to get rid of the color of impulsiveness." Su Lu raised his head to look at the flat red ball in the middle of the street. He frowned, but there was a smile on his face. "On the contrary, I think that cousin of yours should be troubled right now. He needs to be more careful. How many years have we known each other?" Jian Shuer quietly looked at his face and asked. "If we count from the victory concert, then it's the autumn of the 68th year of the constitutional calendar. It's been more than 3 years. Su Lu seriously thought about it, then said with a smile, "Of course, if we count from the time you played that little orphan girl on TV, it's been about 10 years, right? You know, I grew up watching the TV shows you acted in. I often hear these kinds of jokes that aren't funny at all." Jian Shuer shrugged and said with a smile, "Actually, what I want to say is that in the past 3 years, you have indeed changed a little. Although you still don't talk too much, you're not as quiet as you used to be." She glanced at the members of Group 7 behind her in the shadows of the street, and shook her head with emotion. "And you seem to be a lot more confident. With just these few companions, you dare to claim that the most powerful man in the federal military is afraid of you. In the past, because of your unscrupulous father, I became a fugitive in the Federation. I was as nervous as a frozen fart all day long, so of course I'm more quiet," Su Lu said. Jian Shuer interrupted, "I know what's going on in the military, but I'm still impressed by your novel and vulgar way of describing things." Su Lu continued with a smile, "Later, your cousin, and the vice president, who died at the hands of Shi Qinghai, wanted to use this incident to pin me down. In the end, my grandfather stepped in and helped me. The biggest hidden danger in my life, the heaviest stone in my heart, suddenly disappeared. Of course, my mood improved a lot. When a person is in a good mood, they're willing to talk more. As for confidence, of course, General Li Jiedu is a very excellent and dangerous person. But as long as I'm not stupid enough to put myself in a dead end, I can't think of any way he can control me." Su Li's thick eyebrows furrowed again. The corners of his lips were tightly pressed together, and he pointed at the few high-rise buildings in front of him and said, "You see, I know very well where the dangers are, so these dangers don't exist for me." "I don't really understand what you're trying to say." In the shadow of the hoodie, that pair of elegant eyebrows furrowed beautifully. She looked at the buildings in the twilight and laughed at herself in confusion. Then she turned her head and looked very seriously at Su Li's face. She studied his straight eyebrows, small eyes, and the faint traces of hardships that added a bit of a man's calmness. "I'm a member of the Lees of Philadelphia. I know better than you that the blood of the Lee family is very stubborn and conservative. My cousin may be the most terrifying schemer, but I don't doubt that in his heart, the glory of the family occupies the most important position." "I've never doubted that," Su Lu said. "For so many years, for so many things to have done, I believe that a large part of the reason is that he has always been planning how the Li family can continue to maintain its current status, or rather, its glory after the death of the war god. Why are you suddenly talking about this?" He looked at Jian Shuer in confusion. "Right now, this dangerous and sensitive situation is one that we have no way of alleviating. It's probably only under certain circumstances that he will give up part of his plan. For example, he won't kill you, but instead try to subdue you. At the very least, it won't be in the next second that the entire Federation will become a battlefield full of blood and fire because of the two of you, so… Jian Shuer looked at him and smiled. Her eyes narrowed into cute moons. She tilted her head and said, "Let's get married." Hearing these words, Su Li's eyes couldn't help but narrow. Everyone knew that whenever he narrowed his eyes into two slits, it meant that he was in a relatively nervous state. Perhaps he was preparing to kill, or preparing to be killed, or perhaps preparing to get married. The stroll under the setting sun unknowingly came to a stop in front of an ordinary building. This was the marriage registration office of a certain district of the capital. The light screen above the registration office was broadcasting a poorly made picture of flowers. In this spring, a certain person's eyes narrowed like flowers. Chapter 749. In this moment of twilight, Su Lu thought of many scenes from the past. He watched her on TV, he cried in the woods of Hushi State, he went to her concert, and he thought that it was the most beautiful dream that had appeared before his eyes. He suddenly remembered that he did not meet her before the victory concert, but during that earlier concert filled with slaughter. After that, they became familiar with each other until they went on a blind date. In every similar scene, he would always think of many scenes from the past. It was not that the art appraisal in the library of Hushi State University had really cultivated a strong artistic style, but that those scenes were too deep in his mind. Let's get married. What was very interesting was that in the countless scenes that Su Lu, who was not an artistic youth, suddenly and forcefully wedged into the image of that white-robed, bare-legged, ultra-literary middle-aged man, for the peace, love, and justice of the universe, you have to be together. Be together, Master Fan of the Empire once said. Squinting at the colorful flowers blooming on the wall of the marriage registration office, Su Lu gently hugged Jian Shuer, letting the warm embrace melt into the twilight. The barbecue stall on the streets of Wangdu was filled with the smell of chives and bean rolls. The cheap black market stall had 3 extremely out-of-place bottles of expensive Wenjun No. 1. The amber liquor rippled in the glasses, just like the clumsy and confused expression that Su Lu could not suppress at this moment. Xiong Linquan and a few other team members were silently eating dinner at a nearby table. They looked up from time to time, but did not sit over, because Zhou Yu was sitting at this table. And then, Zhou Yu had clearly drunk a lot. Her beautiful face was flushed. She narrowed her eyes at Su Lu and asked, "Did you guys register?" "No, this matter was too sudden." Su Lu answered very seriously. "I promised her that after this matter was settled, we would immediately get married. That hooligan must be very happy that you finally got the most famous woman in the Federation." Zhou Yu looked at her slender fingers and said, "I've never had a problem with your messy love life, as long as you don't marry that disgusting Zhang Xiaoming." She raised her head and looked at him with slight ridicule. "What about Shang Qiu and Nan Xiangmei?" Su Lu stared at the wine glass in front of him. Suddenly, he grabbed it and drained it in one gulp. Stimulated by the alcohol, he frowned and muttered to himself, "I'm only one person. The Federation is not like Bermuda, where I can casually marry a few more." Zhou Yu frowned and looked at him. Her nose moved slightly as if he was a smelly stone in a septic tank. She said sarcastically, "You are not making a choice but avoiding a choice. Although the effect is the same, you are not King manly enough. Take that national girl for example." She actually asked the girl to take the initiative to propose. "Are you a man?" She also drained the wine in her glass in one gulp and mocked. "Now that I think about it, that guy was actually more manly than you. Before he died, he still remembered the women he had messed with." Su Lu wanted to argue about who was more manly, the playboy Shi Qinghai and a useless guy like himself. He just felt that the way Zhou Yu promoted Nan Xiangmei just now was very similar to the way Little Watermelon promoted Shang Qiu in the old mansion in the 2nd latitude district of Sunset Province. Suddenly, a little boy's sharp cursing voice came from the table next to them. Zhou Liuhua was probably not used to the smell of the barbecue stall in the night market. He was desperately twisting his body in the arms of the nanny, crying and cursing as he kicked his legs, leaving several footprints on the nanny's clothes. Su Li's face was a little ugly. He looked at Zhou Yu and said, "Why is he so bad-tempered? Stubborn, proud, violent and cold. Naturally, he inherited it from his evil young mother," Zhou Yu replied self-deprecatingly. "I spent too much time on the front line. I really didn't expect you to teach him to be like this." Su Lu said with a sullen face, "You'd better control him, or else I really can't help but beat him up. It's normal for little boys to be naughty. They're still young. They'll be fine when they grow up." When Zhong Huiyan was 5 years old, he already knew how to follow me in the ventilation tunnel without saying a word. Temperament has nothing to do with age. So you stared at him coldly and said, "This is my son. I'd like to see who dares to beat him up." From a biological and legal point of view, he has 2 fathers. Now that one of them is dead, if I don't discipline him, who will? Su Lu paused for a moment and said self-deprecatingly, "I remember the scene when I bumped into you and your sister in front of the nightclub in Linhai Province. I don't want Lu Hua to be beaten into a pig's head by the 2nd Shi Qinghai in the future. I hope he's the 2nd Shi Qinghai." Zhou Yu frowned and slowly lowered her head. Then she raised her head and drank another glass of wine. Su Lu looked at her quietly. Suddenly, he said to the little boy who was struggling and crying at the table next to them, "If you don't listen to me, I'll beat you to death." His voice wasn't loud and his attitude didn't look very fierce. But strangely, children were probably like animals and were naturally sensitive to real danger. Zhou Liuhua stared blankly at the uncle who was sitting with his mother. He immediately pursed his lips and let his snot drip down. He didn't even dare to make a sound of sobbing. The nanny looked at Su Lu gratefully. The little boy didn't know whether it was because he was too tired from crying or because he was scared by Su Lu. He hugged the nanny's neck tightly and fell asleep. The wind-proof lights on the barbecue stall in the night market gave off a faint glow to the surrounding leave. It felt warm and somewhat like a scene in a movie. Jian Shuer's idea makes sense. But it's impossible for both sides to stop. I have to send all of them to prison before I can complete the task that the hooligan gave me. Zhou Yu glanced at him and said, "I originally thought that with your personality, you would directly rush into the military headquarters in a military mecca and blow up Li Jiedu. I promised the war god, I promised Mr. President, I promised your father, and I also promised Shi Qinghai over the phone. Although he couldn't hear me at the time, I will do my best to protect myself while destroying the enemy." After a moment of silence, Su Lu said, "I still don't have much confidence in the Federation's laws. But after what he did on Parliament Hill, the supporters of the radical faction in the military have been pretty much wiped out. As long as Mr. President can control the situation, the judicial process can continue. Do you really think that someone like Li Jiedu, who hid for more than a decade and used only a few months to easily take over the legacy his father left in the military and firmly control 2.5 military regions and nearly 100 divisions, like Li Jiedu, can really be brought to court by the judicial process? The military is ultimately the Federation's military. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff is not the president of the Federation. This is the capital, not a battlefield. Whether it is from the perspective of the law or public opinion, Li Jiedu has too many inherent shortcomings. If he really dares to instigate a coup in the military, how many of those troops will listen to him and stand against the elected government and Mr. President? Those generals and normal soldiers won't have the courage to face the spirit of the Constitution in order to satisfy his ambition and his seemingly hot-blooded slogans. If it is a war against the Empire, the person who has the military is undoubtedly the most powerful. But in the internal struggle of the Federation, that is not completely the case. Just like right now, Lee Jae-do really wants me dead, but he can only assassinate me. He can't order the 17th Division to surround this block and directly bombard me and my team members into pieces of meat with cannonballs. How exactly are you going to cooperate with Mr. President's plan? Zoyu looked at him quietly. Her watery eyes were tinged with faint worry. If it is really as you said, and the President is in a very difficult situation, then the difficult situation can become dangerous at any time. What can you do after the danger knocks on the door of the youth apartment? Bai Yulan said that my greatest strength is that I am good at simplifying complicated things. But right now, the Federation situation can't be simplified. In your eyes, forcibly returning from the West Woods and holding this press conference in the afternoon seems more like nonsense to vent my anger. In fact, I have my own plan. Tomorrow, the evidence of Vice President Byron and Lee Jae-do's involvement in the case of the ancient bell will appear on the internet to create a stir. You know, now the civilian internet of the Federation has been turned into a sh*t pit by those demons raised by the capitalists. It has no credibility in the hearts of the people, and it may even be directly regarded as a scam or a dark fantasy novel. But it is good to be able to create a stir first. Then, Chief Editor Bob and reporter Wood will choose the right time to release the relevant information. With the credibility of the Capital Special District Daily News, I think this storm will be bigger this time. The Ministry of Justice and the relevant departments, as well as the civilian agencies in the building of the Ministry of National Defense, are still under the control of the official residents. When the Federation begins to stir up a stir, Mr. President will have sufficient reason to either reauthorize me or authorize the Ministry of Justice to continue investigating the case of the ancient bell. I think even Parliament Hill will be on our side at that time. At that time, it will be General Lee Jae-do's turn to make a difficult decision. Should he wait for the investigation to end or fight to the death? Yes, he will definitely choose the latter, and I will also wait for him to choose the latter. Su-la looked at Zoyu, whose eyebrows were getting tighter and tighter, and explained in a low voice, I am not good at political schemes. I will only force them to take action. I will keep an eye on the slightest change in the troops that Lee Jae-do can command. As long as they really do take action, I will stop them and get all the evidence in my hand. With this arrangement, the turmoil in the Federation can be controlled, and as long as I stay in the official residence, the most important thing, the safety of Mr. President, can be perfectly guaranteed. Zoyu frowned and held her chin. She suddenly felt that the knowledge she had learned over the years and the judgment and analysis ability that helped Su-lu before were all very funny. This is an idiot's logical deduction. At this moment, in her eyes, Su-lu really looked like an idiot. She said sarcastically, You said a lot of nonsense, but the most important thing is the word stop. How can you stop the fully armed federal forces? And the safety of Mr. President, how can you guarantee it? Zoyu spread her hands and stared at him angrily. Do you think you are the great creator who can turn thousands of armored vehicles and mechas into scrap metal with just a few words? Yes, according to the charter of the Federation, President Pabre could easily control the army, as long as the army did not have its own thoughts. But now, the key was that the army had the most invincible armed force in the universe and had started to have its own thoughts. Who could stop all this? Su-lu raised his wine glass to toast the worried girl in red. He thought to himself that he could indeed turn thousands of armored vehicles, mechas, and even battleships into scrap metal. With the support of the glory of the Charter, a certain someone could do anything, but do I have to tell you this? Chapter 750. Have you thought about Li Feng's problem? Zhou gently swirled the wine glass with her fingers. The beautiful amber color contrasted nicely with the terrible leek paste. I forgot, Sulu replied. Zhou looked up at him. After thinking for a moment, she said seriously, You forced your way back to the capital ring and then came up with this so-called plan. In my opinion, it's still laughably naive, but it's only natural when you think about it. You're an engineer who's only good at dealing with machines, numbers, and formulas. It's indeed a bit difficult for you to think about these problems. At least you're willing to think about it, which means you've improved. Perhaps this is a kind of regression. Sulu shrugged. This answer is somewhat interesting. It's much better than the average speech level you've shown in the past. Zhou mocked, back to your naive plan. Of course, I firmly admit that if you're really the creator, then no matter how boring your plan is, it'll work. And Mr. President will definitely be happy to see this, so, Sulu, I'll pray for you. Sulu and the members of Group 7 silently disappeared into the night on the streets of Wangdu. No one knew where their destination was, and no one knew what they were going to do. Zhou sat at the night market stall with a wine glass in her hand. She did not say any useless prayers for a certain person. She just sat there silently, occasionally pouring the wine into her bright red lips. The strong wine almost made her red lips burn. Other than the owner of the barbecue stall, whose expression was much more numb than before, there were no other customers. The nanny carried the child to the car. The two orderlies at the table in the distance looked at her worriedly, worried that she would turn into the rumored unruly and cold young lady when she was drunk. A black car silently slid over like a ghost. There was no logo on the car, not even any eye-catching decorations, but for Zhou, she could easily recognize this specially made black car. There were no more than 10 of them in the entire universe. Zhou waved her hand to signal the two orderlies to stay where they were and not to come over. Zhou took a deep breath and carefully tidied her clothes. She adjusted the angle of the red flower on her temple to be impeccable. Then, she revealed a kind and reserved smile that gave a sense of distance. She stood up and greeted them respectfully. There was no need to worry about the black car at the back of the mountain. Li Ziyuan had officially begun his political career in S2 Oak State. Sulu had just quietly left in a black car, so the person in the black car could only be that madam. And that madam was qualified to be welcomed by anyone in the Federation, let alone the girl she had single-handedly cultivated at the afternoon tea party back then. Yuzi, long time no see. Lady Tai looked at Zhou with a smile and then sat down. This simple action surprised Zhou a little. She never thought that madam would sit on a roadside stool covered in grease. This was not a ridiculous reservedness of a rich person who had not experienced the affairs of the world, but a very natural minimum requirement of life. Madam, yes, long time no see. Zhou calmed her mind and responded with a smile. The curvature of her lips was very beautiful. It was not dazzling, but it was not mediocre. You are calmer than before, and you are more independent than before. This is very good. We women should never put the hope of a happy life on men who have no hope at all. Lady Tai said with a light sigh, What a pity. Back then, I only thought you had a big butt, and now I am discovering more and more of your good points. Unfortunately, it is already too late. Zhou's face revealed a rare bit of embarrassment. A big butt and good fertility, this type of vulgar and somewhat contemptuous evaluation normally would easily make a woman unhappy, but she was already used to hearing this type of evaluation in her adolescence. Moreover, Lady Tai's tone always carried a natural and refreshing autumn air. I came to see you today mainly for 2 reasons. Lady Tai looked at her with a smile and said, The first is what Sulu said to you just now. The second is, I really want to know, from your point of view, who exactly will obtain the final victory in this situation. After a moment of silence, Zhou said what she could casually say. Then she furrowed her brows slightly and said, Although I don't think Su Lu is a guy who is good at political structure, I agree with one of his judgments. Even if Li Jiedu's intelligence and ability is astonishing, in the end, he is not his father, Marshal Li. Even if he is in fact the #1 figure in the federal military, he definitely doesn't have the ability to make the entire federal forces go crazy and have the prestige to dance with it. When facing the president and the government, I always feel like he doesn't have too many perfect methods to handle things. If he is slightly careless, he can only leave behind a black name in the annals of history, but there is no way for him to obtain absolute power in this world. That's right. Just like how you are worried about Su Lu, this little guy's unreasonable self-confidence, for me, Li Jiedu's overly abnormal and shoddy killing, as well as his completely opposite self-confidence, is something that I am extremely puzzled about. Lady Tai's eyes drooped slightly, as if she was thinking about some very troublesome problem. With my understanding of the Lees of Philadelphia, the old man's son is definitely not stupid to this extent. In fact, the things that have happened recently have already proven his ability. Zhou Yu sighed softly and said, "Could it be that blind optimism really is an emotion that can infect each other? But the problem is that history is heavy. He can allow people like Su Lu to be naive, but he definitely won't allow Li Jiedu to have the possibility of being childish. History is heavy. This seems to be a topic of discussion during an afternoon tea back then?" Lady Tai looked at her and said with a smile. Zhou Yu smiled reservedly, and then suddenly narrowed her eyes and asked, "Madam, you are concerned about their victory or defeat. Does that mean that you won't get involved in this chaotic battle? If possible, may I know which side you are inclined to support?" Li Jiedu and those people in the army wanted to kill your older brother Crown Prince back then. Naturally, I won't support them, Lady Tai calmly replied, but back then I could even ignore Macklin, so naturally, I can also ignore these old grudges. After all, I have to admit that regardless of whether it is Li Jiedu or those who stand on his side, they have enough qualifications to discuss matters related to benefits and compensation with me. Zhou Yu listened quietly, not saying a word. I won't support anyone, and I won't use benefits as a bargaining chip at this moment. I just need to quietly watch and see who wins in the end, and then ask them to cut a piece for me. This analogy might be a bit vulgar, but you know that I like to cook in the kitchen, Lady Tai said with a smile. Zhou Yu suddenly laughed, slightly raising her proud chin, and said softly, "Madam, in my opinion, the so-called quietly watching should be the biggest mistake that the 7 great families have made in these years." Lady Tai's expression froze slightly. When those soldiers tried to kill my older brother Crown Prince in Linhai State Gymnasium, although the elders of the other families personally went to the back of Macho's mountain to explain and even shed tears to beg for your approval, in fact, everyone knew that they were gloating. They didn't do anything specific, they just watched. When the previous government carried out the Macklin project, the 7 great families still didn't do anything. You watched as Macklin messed up the Federation, and you only came out to clean up the mess in the end, trying to obtain a decisive victory. However, you didn't expect that Su Lu and Shi Qinghai directly killed that old senator, and the Bureau of Proclamation even found out that Macklin was actually a spy for the Empire. And recently, the radicals of the government and the military joined hands. They even sent information to the Empire's military department to kill Commander Zhong and his wife in Constellation. Then, the government began to vigorously harvest the West Woods. During this time, did the other 6 families do anything? No, you didn't do anything. You were still watching and then trying to follow behind the government to take a few bites. Zhou Yu's expression was calm, but there was a hint of her unique biting cold. Even in front of the most terrifying lady in the Federation, her tone was still calm and firm. I don't understand what the legendary 7 great families are thinking. Where did your foresight go? You didn't do anything, you just watched, so now the federal military is basically going to fall into the hands of the radicals, and now, you can't do anything. You can only stare with your eyes wide open and refuse to admit it, but desperately hope that Su Lu can solve these problems. Lady Tai listened quietly. After a moment, she smiled slightly and said, Yuzi, I like you more and more, but you have to believe in one thing. 4 deformed existences like the 7 great families, even if they don't do anything, just watching is enough to deter others. Zhou smiled and shook her head. She said, Madam, I believe that the 72 years of history of the constitutional era will definitely be written by people like Shi Qinghai and Su Lu, who do things. The Charter Square was empty and quiet in the middle of the night. The terrorist attack on Parliament Hill a few days ago had raised the security level of the square by 2 levels. In the dark corners and in the old multi-story buildings on both sides of the square, there were countless police and special task force surveillance teams hidden. For Su Lu, these were not obstacles. The members of Group 7 were divided into 3 teams to hide in the forest behind the Windy Slope Club. Under the cover of the glory of the Charter, he quietly passed through the forest and came to the back of the president's official residence. Just as Zhou said, people like him and Shi Qinghai were the most typical people of action. In the end, the so-called plan still had 2 sides: to be arrested or to arrest others, to be killed or to kill others. He had to enter the president's official residence to implement this plan. Most importantly, he had to ensure the safety of Mr. Pabre under the threat of the radicals in the military. Under the precise coordination of the Federal Central Computer, the 3-level electronic surveillance network of the Federation allowed Su Lu to quietly invade with great comfort. There was no groaning, and no one was alarmed. Then, under the nervous gaze of Miss Federation, Su Lu climbed into the boudoir of the first daughter of the Federation. He looked apologetically at the trampled quilt. The 2 whispered for a moment, and then he came to the president's study. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Nights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.